You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Icons, where listeners are introduced to incredible people working within the law enforcement community who have made a profound impact in our world. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. On this episode of Icons, Thomas is joined by three-time elected Sheriff Mike Chapman of Loudoun County, Virginia. Tune in to hear about Sheriff Chapman's law enforcement career at the local, state, and federal levels, as well as his involvement in international law enforcement. With a lifelong career dedicated to public service, Sheriff Chapman succinctly describes the overarching theme of this honorable duty. We answer directly to the people. And now for Icons, featuring Sheriff Mike Chapman, a lifetime of service.
Sheriff Chapman, thank you so much for being here today and for being a part of this series. It is, I believe, going to be a really great discussion. I'm really excited about it.
Well, happy to be here, Thomas. Thank you.
So I wanted to start with how long your career in law enforcement has been.
I've actually been in it almost 44 years. I started in December. Actually, it is 44 years. I started in December 1978. That's where I was hired as a police officer recruit for the Howard County Police Department in Maryland. I had just turned 21, youngest person in my class, in my academy class, and I've been doing some form of law enforcement ever since. So,
just for some context, I'm going to age myself. That's longer than I have been alive.
You had to say that.
Which is, I know, I had to do it, which is incredible. But really, it's longer than that in a way if you count growing up with your dad. And
sure,
we'll have some time to talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, I just want to tell listeners that you are about to hear an incredible career in law enforcement. And spoiler alert, I already know most of it, but I'm going to try and work some more of the details out of Sheriff Chapman here. But I want to be mindful of our time. This episode could easily clock in at 3 hours, and we all know the sheriff has important work to get back to. So let's jump into your childhood a little bit and your experience learning about law enforcement through your dad's career.
Sure. I grew up in Wheaton, Maryland, born in 1957, so I am a little bit older than you. As a young kid, I would hear my dad talk about, he was a police officer in Washington, D.C., and then later a detective. And growing up, I would hear some of his stories, when I was old enough to actually comprehend them, and thought it was pretty interesting line of work. And in knowing my dad, I thought, he really seemed to enjoy talking about some of the things he'd encountered as a police officer and certainly as a detective, and I thought it was pretty interesting, and I thought it'd be a very interesting career. It's not where I started, to go in a career when I was a young man, coming out of high school and going into community college, but I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do, but ultimately I kind of went back to that and thought, this really would be kind of neat because you're serving the public, you're doing a lot of great things, helping people out, and it's just a variety of work. The one thing I've got to say that I've found about a career in law enforcement throughout my 44 years is that it's the kind of a job where you go to work every day and you basically have no idea how the day is going to go. So if you like complete routine, it's not necessarily a good job for you.
Right.
If you like to go to work and have some different things happen to you in a particular day and kind of never know what direction your day is going to go in, well, I've always kind of enjoyed that.
Right.
So.
When you were young, you got your black belt in Taekwondo. Is that right?
That's right.
How old were you when you did that?
I was in high school. I got it just around about the time I graduated high school. I was 17 years old. It was something I was really interested in. After I got my black belt, I started teaching for the Junior Institute. Back in those days, He was the biggest name in Taekwondo in the Washington, D.C. area. He had about 8 schools around the Beltway. I was the lead instructor for the school out in Bowie, Maryland. And I did that for a while, and I thought maybe that might be my career, and I was doing that for a while, and I got involved in some full contact fights. I fought for several different organizations, most of which was the Professional Karate Association, the PKA. Only had 6 pro fights, but it was an interesting time for me. A lot of working out, not a whole lot of reward for that. The money was almost nothing, for all the amount of work that you put into it and all the danger associated with getting into the ring and duking it out. So full contact fighting, and I thought, well, this may be something, karate may be where I want to go. And after I did that for a while, and I realized it probably wasn't a good career for me. I wanted to get married. I actually married my high school sweetheart. She was from Rockville, Maryland. I was from Wheaton, Maryland. I went to different high schools, but we dated all through high school. And I figured, well, let me do a couple of things. Let me get involved in a career that will be interesting and exciting, and also something that has obviously halfway decent pay and benefits and that sort of thing. And maybe we can get a family started, which is what we did. We got married at I was 21, she was 20, so we got married really quite young, and started our lives there. So it was almost as soon as I was still in the academy. I just actually graduated from the academy, the police academy, and started my field training officer program. So I was still on probation when we got married. So it's a good thing. Good thing I didn't screw that up, because I could have been out of a job after just having gotten married. But it all worked out for us.
Do you think that your experience in martial arts prepared you in some way for being in law enforcement?
I think it did. I think if you look at there weren't I think it actually helped me get hired. I think the fact is, back in those days, you didn't have you didn't have tasers, you didn't have pepper spray, you didn't have so I think one of the things that they always looked at was, when they were hiring people as police officers, is this somebody that can take care of themselves, or if they get in a tussle, are they going to come out okay on these kinds of things? I actually think that was part of the job. When I think about when I was first a cop, really all I had was a radio that popped out of the charger in the car, and a nightstick, and a gun, of course. That was it. I mean, we didn't have anything else. I mean, I look now at the vest that our deputies wear, and all the things, the exterior vests that they have, and all the things that they have on there is pretty amazing, But we didn't have any of that, So I think one of the criteria way back then was to hire people that they thought, if they got in a physical confrontation, they'd be able to come out okay on top of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you grew up locally here in D.C., in Maryland, in Wheaton, and I was actually curious. I know Chief Tom Manger grew up in Silver Spring area. Did you guys happen to know each other?
Did not know him. I did not meet him until after I became sheriff, and
really?
I knew he was at the time. He was had just gone over to Montgomery County, I think, as the chief. Not just gone over, but been over there for a while. I knew he had been the Fairfax chief, but he's a great guy. We've developed a friendship over time. He's just a terrific guy. I think he does a terrific job. We don't always, agree on things. Maybe policing, maybe a little bit political, but I would say that he's dedicated to the profession, and he's a very intelligent and just a tremendous leader.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to just talk briefly, going back to you meeting your wife. So what high schools did you guys go to?
So she went to Magruder High School. I went to Wheaton High School. We met through, I had actually gone through 8 years of Catholic school, St. Catherine's School. Moved to Florida with the family for a year. My dad wanted to get down to Florida. Didn't really work out. We came back to Wheaton. I went to Wheaton High School. And through a friend of mine, who's still a friend of mine, he lives in Tennessee right now, but he introduced us, and we just got along, and we've been together ever since. And 6 kids later and 10 grandkids later, we're still going strong.
So how many years has it been total now?
So we've been married. So it'll be 44 years, I think, in March that we've been married. So it's
congratulations.
Well, thanks. It's a long time. Yes, yeah.
Also,
I actually probably have about 3 children that are older than you. So
I think you do. So tell us a little bit about when you decided to apply for law enforcement, career in law enforcement. And what that process was like at the time.
So I was looking at different police jobs. I was actually in the process for Montgomery County at the time, and then there was a person that got disqualified in the process, and they filed a lawsuit, and that kind of delayed the process. And I was getting kind of frustrated because I knew I wanted to get going. We wanted to get going with life. And I remember sitting in the living room in my parents' house with my then girlfriend, and who's now obviously my wife Ann, and we're talking about. Well, maybe, she goes, maybe they advertise police jobs in the newspaper. And I said, no, they don't advertise police jobs in the newspaper. And so she's looking through the classified section, and there you go, Howard County, looking for police officers. Because I always kind of thought that if you wanted to be in this job, you actually sought the job out. They didn't actually recruit you, Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, there was an advertisement for Howard County Police. So I applied, and as I was looking for other jobs, they were actually doing a very efficient job in the process. I mean, with the interviews, with the scheduling, with the polygraphs, with the background investigation and all that. So they actually moved at a pretty good clip. So they were the first ones to offer me a job. But really, I'd only applied for Montgomery County, maybe another spot or two. I can't recall. But Howard County actually moved along pretty quick. And when they offered the job, I jumped all over it.
And so you served when you were at Howard County a couple of different roles. What were they?
I did about 3 years in patrol. Overall, I did about 3 on the special operations section, which was really kind of the SWAT team. But it was almost like a catch-all unit. We did a lot of things besides SWAT training. And then a year as a detective. I would say what got my interest into DEA, I didn't even really know DEA existed till I was on the SWAT team. And what happened with that was we would go out and because DEA really doesn't have a whole lot of staff, so they had, it's probably not much different now. Probably about 5,000 agents that covered the entire globe. It really wasn't much, maybe a little bit more than that now. So when you really break it down, and we worked a lot with the Baltimore office, and the Baltimore office had very few people that covered the county. So when they wanted to do like a drug raid, they would actually, reach out to the local law enforcement and say, hey, look, we need your help. We're gonna raid this house. We got a search warrant. We got an arrest warrant, that kind of thing. And being on a SWAT team, we were the guys that got called for that. So we got used to going out with the DEA on the SWAT calls, and I thought, well, that's not a bad thing, So I looked into that, and I was also looking with the FBI and looking for some federal agencies. And my dad had encouraged me to go that direction because he thought it might be a better, both an overall career move, and that the retirement system would probably be better. And of course, it's the year that I joined, they changed the retirement system. It got a lot worse. So, I mean, they were in the process. I didn't know that. I used to have the civil service retirement system, and then they changed it to the federal retirement system, which is not nearly as good. However, but I don't regret any move that I made. It's been a terrific career overall, and it was a good move for me at the time to go from Howard County into DEA.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask how you made that jump from Howard County into the DEA. So that makes a lot of sense. So you were on SWAT, you guys were supplementing DEA support in specific areas. So that's how you got to know them.
That's right. That's how I got to know the DEA guys, yeah.
So then, so what year was that? How old were you at that point?
So what had happened was when I was with Howard County, I didn't realize I'd had an associate's degree when I went in. And quite frankly, back in 1978, when I was hired, I think we had one person in our academy that had a bachelor's degree. I mean, it's certainly changed a lot now. I had an associate's degree. I was, I think, the only other person that had a degree. You had other people that had college credits and that kind of thing. But I found out through another guy that was on the SWAT team. He was like, "Hey, look, the county will kind of supplement your tuition if you go through the county." And so I decided to. I looked into that, and I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." Not at the time really thinking much about where that would take me. I just thought it'd be nice to get my bachelor's degree. So I went back, and at the time we had 2 kids already, so it wasn't an easy thing. So I was because my wife was working full time, I was working full time. So I went back and started taking classes to get my undergraduate at University of Maryland, and it was the night and weekend program. So I mean, I'm trying to take off leave, and we didn't have educational leave on it. I had to burn up a lot of my vacation leave to go. I would go on the weekends. I had classes on the weekends and all that. So it was a lot to do. So I got my bachelor's degree, and actually I'd gone 2 years, and I realized that if I kept going at the pace where I was only taking maybe throughout a year, only 15 credit hours, it's going to take forever, So I decided to load up, and I finished my last 2 semesters taking 15 credits each. My wife was working full-time. I was working full-time. I was pretty much working nights. She's pretty much working days. I've got the kids. I'm watching the kids during the day, and that was before you had computers and laptops. Right. I'm writing papers, and my kids are like, 3 years old, 2 years old. They're taking my papers and throwing them all over the house and stuff like it. It was really, really kind of a difficult thing to do. It was a tough way. It's a tough way to get an education, but I did, and I'm glad I did, because I would have never qualified for anything beyond what I was doing right then had I not gotten my bachelor's degree.
So I was going to ask why you would do that, especially at the time when in law enforcement, not many officers had their bachelor's. So it was to be eligible for position federally.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So what was, so how old were you at this point?
So I was, so by the time I had graduated, so I got my degree at 27 years old, and that's when I graduated University of Maryland. So I had 27 years old, and by that time we just had our 3rd child. Okay, so so at 27 years old, already married with 3 kids. So it was a pretty busy life. Yeah. And then to apply to the DEA, and basically at the time, just kind of give you a frame of reference. It's going to be tough for you to digest this, but I was like pretty much topped out as a journeyman as a police officer at $27,000 a year. Okay. DEA I hired on as a GS7. That's all they would hire you on it at that time. It didn't matter how much experience you had, whatever. They kind of changed that around a little bit. Of course, the year after I got hired as a GS7, because the next year I got a junior partner who was basically less qualified than me, and I finally got to his level, even though I was his senior partner. But anyway, so I was making about $17,000 a year. So think about this: $17,000 a year. 3 kids, moving down to Miami, Florida, and starting a whole new career, not knowing where it's going to go, not really having any support. We had my parents lived in Melbourne, Florida, in the Atlantic, Florida, which is on the beach side of Melbourne, which is about 5 hours away from Miami. So it's not like we had anybody close that could help with the kids and all that. Very, very rough start in Miami, especially considering the amount of work that we had to do down there. In DEA, they have what they now call availability pay. And what they do is they pay you 25% of your salary, which is included in your salary. But you have to work. At that time, you were required to work to get to earn that a 10-hour day. So you're already working 50 hours a day, but everything else after that, you work it, and there's no accountability for it. In other words, you're working all the time, and you're not getting any extra pay. So it was interesting because I would be working with the Metro-Dade homicide. We worked on this operation called Red Realm, where we had our drug-related homicides and that kind of stuff. And while they're getting paid overtime by the federal government, they're getting overtime. We're not. And, so it was to their advantage to actually try to set up deals and activities in the evening for them to get the overtime. Right. And we're for me, so you ended up working, honestly, the days went on forever. I mean, you might go in on a Tuesday, get caught up on a surveillance, following somebody around, because those were the days before you had GPS, before you had all these technical capabilities. So if you wanted to follow somebody that was dealing drugs and you wanted to find out who they were meeting with, where they were getting their drugs, who were they delivering them to, what banking institutions they were using, and that kind of stuff, you pretty much had to follow them around. And so you and 5 of your group members are following people around in unmarked cars all the time. And evenings, nights, you might go to work on a Tuesday and not get home till a Thursday. I mean, it was really, really crazy hours. A very, very difficult start to that career. So it was pretty tough on the family, I would say.
Wow. Yeah. So was your father retired at this point?
Yeah. Well, my father was long retired by that point, but yeah.
And so what was the training like? How was it different from what you were used to at the county level?
So what I noticed, I would say, going through the academy was how aggressive, like the PT and the defensive tactics were. Okay, and the reason is because when you're a federal agent, you're not in the public eye as much, and the people that certainly when you're dealing with, when you're talking about drug traffickers, Nobody likes drug traffickers. I mean, they're like the lowest of the low. Okay. So it's not like they're going to, for the most part, that they're going to file lawsuits against you or anything like that, plus you're working, everything that you're doing is plain clothes, undercover, that kind of thing, What I noticed the difference was certainly in police training and defensive tactics is they would teach you like these come-alongs. They would always make sure that you're trying to do things that didn't look like you were violently trying to arrest somebody and all that kind of thing, where I found it quite different in the federal system, back then. Okay, so what you're talking about is 1986, 1987 and stuff. So it was a lot different back then. So they've actually they've probably changed it quite a bit since then. But back in those days, I would say that I saw there was like a less concern because you weren't in the public eye and you were dealing with people that nobody wanted to deal with anyway. So I would say that was different. I would say the training was far more paramilitary. So when we were, I was kind of surprised at that. So we actually were co-located with the FBI in Quantico. It was before DEA had their own academy in Quantico. They used to train down in Glencoe, Georgia. They moved it up to Quantico. And I think there was like this competition between the DEA and the FBI as to like who's training their people, who's harder on their people or whatever. And it was really kind of interesting because I don't mean this is in no way to disparage the FBI. It's just a different mindset in their training, okay? And they'd be walking to their classrooms like, with a coffee in their hand, where in DEA, we're at the range, we're in our fatigues. They would always make sure that by the time you cleaned your guns, you didn't have enough time to actually clean your gun to get to class. So you're actually sprinting, from one end of the campus to the other to get to your classrooms, running people over and everything else. It was that competitive, and they wanted to show how competitive they were and how hard they were on their people. So I was in the second class to go through there, class 39. Basic agent class 39 was the first to go through Quantico. We were class 40. And what they did was they were staggered. So they, class 39, we trailed them by about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks or something to that thing. So class 39, they started out, I think everybody started out with about 46 hires, okay. They only graduated 18 out of their class. That's how hard they were on their people. And you might not necessarily know. Sometimes you could figure it out why people got kicked out of the academy, but you'd come to class one day and the person that was sitting next to you is not the person sitting next to you anymore. It's somebody else. And so our class didn't lose too many. I think we lost about 8. I think we probably graduated about 38. But I do remember my class coordinator coming in every morning like, hey, class 39 lost another couple. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, okay, I just started a whole new career. I took a major pay cut. I've got a wife and 3 kids. Man, I could lose this job any second, so you really had to, the pressure was on to perform, so I did well in the academy, but there was a lot of pressure to perform there. So, and DEA made sure that you knew it. They were constantly on you.
So you went from 27,000 to 17.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't think I heard that right, but I heard that right.
Yeah. I took a $10,000 pay cut to start with the DEA. And that's a lot of money back then. It's a percentage-wise, it's a huge cut. Now, the reason that it was worth it to me was because you make that money up quick. You go to a GS9, then a GS11, then a GS12, then a GS13. So once you do that, now you're making a lot more money than you'd make as a cop. But it's going to take you a few years to get there if you're willing to make that sacrifice. Once you get there, you're making more money. But the offset of that is that while you move a lot with DEA, you move a lot less now than you did back then, but you tended to move like every 3 or 4 years on your career, especially if you were looking to get promoted. It was usually another move. So every time you do that, you're starting off on a whole nother mortgage. You got to get your kids in another school. You got all new supplies. You can't use the same furniture in one house that you had in the other. It doesn't fit. All these other kinds of things. So you're constantly, it's one of those things. I mean, so you retire from DEA like I did, and there I'm 51, 52 years old when I retire, and here I am starting off on another mortgage. So hopefully by the time I'm 80, I'll have a house paid off. But that's kind of the way it goes. So these are the sacrifices that you make that you don't really even think about as you go in, because you figure if you stay in one department, and you may not make as much money, your top end salary, but at least you're getting equity in your home. You got some stability, But the offset to that too is, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, my kids, is the fact that the exposure that you get, both international exposure that you get and living in different places throughout the nation, I think gives you a perspective that most people don't get. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. I think it really opens up your aperture, and it really is a good thing for the kids. It's either going to, it's like whatever they say, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think with my kids, it's been a benefit because they were exposed to so many things growing up that really nothing intimidates them. So It's pretty good.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that because that's an amazing aspect of your life. I wanted to dive into a little bit more detail about the work that you were doing in Miami.
Sure.
Was there any specific cases that you guys were working that?
So just to give you, I always like to kind of juxtapose these two things. Okay, so I was Howard County, and there was a mall on Route 40 called the Chatham Mall, and I remember being there as a uniformed officer. And one night, and we had a guy that was acting suspicious in the parking lot. There was a bar that was there, and this guy was out by his car. And so I asked him to step out of his car. And so we're talking, and it's dark, and back then, we had to wear our hats every time we were out of the car. It was like a violation if God help you if your sergeant sees you without your hat on. So we had the big campaign hats. And so I got my hat on, I got my nightstick, I got my flashlight, and I'm talking to this guy, and he takes off running, and he runs towards the apartment complex there. So I'm there trying to hold my radio, I'm trying to hold my flashlight, my nightstick, I'm trying to hold my hat on my head while I'm chasing this guy. So I chase him, and I see he tosses something, and so I throw my flashlight down so I'll be able to come back and retrieve it. And I go and I end up tackling him in the apartment complex and bring him back, and I find this little vial of cocaine, and I was like, "Oh man, good score!" That's it, man. I got a good score here. Then I go down to Miami. Okay, so Miami. Think about this: 1986. The first case I'm on there, I've been on for a couple of weeks, and I think this was right after they had the bloodiest shootout the FBI ever had down there with a guy named Maddox and Pratt or whatever. I think it was Platt down there, where the FBI agents were able to hone in on these guys that were robbing armored cars, and it ended up in this really bad shootout. 2 FBI agents were killed. The bad guys were killed. One FBI agent by the name of Morales he got shot pretty bad in the arm, but was able to take these guys out finally with a shotgun, working it with one arm from the back of the trunk. So I just remember being in the office and all the spouses back then, because all you had was a beeper. You didn't have cell phones, you didn't have anything like that. So, and beepers going off like crazy, and because everybody thought it was DA, all they said was federal agents involved in a shootout, and we were constantly working the street, So that happens, and so my wife is scratching her head like, we came down here for why, and so the first case I go on, I've been on about 3 or 4 weeks down there. And we had a tip that a boat was coming in. It was like probably about a 40-foot cruiser into a canal off Key Biscayne. So we used to get a lot of tips like that, and we'd go out on them because, again, we weren't getting paid overtime. So like you'd go out and watch this to see if whatever happens to stay there till 2 a.m. Well, anyway, so I was out there with one of my partners, and we're on one side of the canal. This vessel comes in, parks up, docks up. And about 5 people get off this boat. And next thing you know, they take a circular saw and they go to the bow of the boat, and they, you see in this, and they cut like a big, I don't know, probably about a 4x4 hole right in the bow of this boat. And then you start seeing them pulling out like sacks and sacks and sacks of cocaine. Well, it was cocaine in these sacks. And so I call, and I'm like, my God, something's happening here, And so I called to get a couple other people down there, and we're trying to get some of the cops down there, but it's taking a while to get people down there. So I tell people where to set up on the side of the canal that we were at, and me and my partner go around the front of the house. And as we were approaching the house, the garage is open. I remember there's a Lincoln Continental there. And I remember the trunk of the Continental being ajar by about an inch or so. And I see this guy coming from around the corner. And I tell him, to freeze. And he looks at he's coming around the corner. He's up not too far from the front of the garage where the trunk of the car is open. He looks at me, I look at him, I draw my weapon. He's looking at me, I'm looking at him. We're kind of like, what's going to happen here next, So he decides finally, after I order him to, put his hands up, and he decides to turn around, run away, and dive in the water. Then I flip the trunk of the car up, and there's a MAC-10 lined up with all these clips ready to roll. And what turned out to be was 350 kilograms of cocaine in all those sacks. So we were able to arrest. It took us a while to find this guy. He actually went back to Cuba. He was a minor league player for the Baltimore Orioles farm team or whatever. And
was he?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ruben Castillo. And he went back to Cuba, and we were able to talk to his wife. He finally came in and, turned himself in. It probably took a year or two to get him to come back to do that. But that was my first exposure. That was only after a couple of weeks on the job. And it wasn't uncommon for us to, we work long-term complex investigations, but it wasn't uncommon for us to get an undercover involved with an informant and to do a 50-kilo deal like in a day. And then, so it does hamper when things move so quick like that, how much research you can do on the person that you're targeting, who they're connected with, where they live, what the makeup of the house is, if we got to hit the house, or are they going to come out? What are we looking at? There's a whole lot of things that you got to take into consideration for safety reasons. And so, the whole concept of running and gunning is basically what we did in Miami. It was constant activity down there. And it was nonstop. Really, back then, I tell people, really, cocaine is literally falling from the sky. You'd have planes that's dropping this stuff, Cocaine was literally falling from the sky. And what you see, when I like to compare this now to what you're seeing with the drug problem now, you would have never seen back then the amount of overdose deaths that you have right now. When you're talking about fentanyl, you're talking about over 100,000 people that are dying annually. Back then, the people that were dying were pretty much the competitors for their share of the market. You might get caught in the crossfire, but for the most part, it was the bad guys fighting over market share. Now they're peddling this, the fentanyl, and people are dying or overdosing, and they don't care if they lose a customer; they're going to get another one. And so it's just a whole different mindset right now with what's going on. It's the danger is actually more in the drugs themselves than it is in the competition to market the drugs and sell the drugs.
So in this event, so this guy pulls up in a boat. Was he by himself, or there was two people?
There were it was me and another agent that went around to the front. There were 5 people total, and so
in his boat.
Yeah, 5 people total. So they pull up the boat, and you start seeing them getting off the boat and getting onto the dock. And then the next thing you know, somebody goes into the house. They come out and they got a circular saw, and they're cutting a hole in the bow of the boat. And next thing you know, it's they're taking out sacks of cocaine. It's all hidden in the bow of the boat.
Right.
Yeah, so
how what's the estimated amount of kilos that were being captured at that time, like annually?
Well, that's a tough call. I don't know if I can remember back.
Well,
that
for
far.
Context, like it's 350 kilos. Is that
huge? I would say that was a big load.
Yeah.
There wasn't like an astronomical load. There was I think probably about a year later, there was a load that came in, and we helped up in Tampa, went up to Tampa, Florida, and a guy, Lucho Santa Cruz Londoño, who was the brother of Chepe Santa Cruz. Lucho Santa Cruz Echeverri, who was the half-brother of Chepe Santa Cruz Londoño. He was the biggest cocaine trafficker in New York City, connected to the Cali cartel, and his brother was responsible for a load of cocaine that had come into the port of Tampa there, or up there by Tarpon Springs, I think, and they had packed the cocaine in almost like Tupperware containers, and they had this hollowed out wood ties, and they would then put the wood back together. They glue it. They would then run it through a joiner, so there was no seams or anything like that. And so fortunately, customs guys drilled it. We went there, and I think that was like 2,000 kilos at the time, which was at that point probably the biggest load that had come into the U.S., it didn't take long to surpass that. Sure. But so they went from, I would say, on a given day, if we wanted to do like we get information on a rip for a day, we get some good information. Probably take us, you're talking about 50 kilos. I would say 50 kilos was not uncommon for a mid-level cocaine trafficker back then. So it was kind of all over the board. But it's kind of funny because I look at Miami Vice and you have these people killing each other over a kilo of cocaine, a couple kilos of cocaine. I mean, it was really, in some ways, much worse than what they were showing on the TV show.
Yeah. Well, I can believe that for sure. And it's just astonishing to think about that quantity, and it's just the tip of the iceberg, and it just keeps coming in over and over, and it's nonstop. There
was a guy by the name of Freddie Aguilera Quijano when I was in Miami that we arrested. He had come in from Cali. We thought he was actually somebody else when we got our information. He was at a bar down in Miami, down in Sweetwater, and so we're watching him, and he comes out, and we go to take him into custody. And we did, and we went back, and we were able to clearly identify him. He was a drug trafficker. He wasn't one we thought he was going to be. He was another one. He was actually the chief chemist for the Cali cartel. So what we went back, and he had car keys, and we were able to get his license, his house, go back to his apartment. He had an apartment, I think, in Miami Beach, and we went back there, and his wife was there. And asked if we could do a search of the home. And back then, consent searches were probably a lot more frequently done than they're done now. And we opened up the closet, and it was really the first time we started seeing cocaine packed in almost like Tupperware, like 1 kilo Tupperware type containers, perfectly. I mean, stacked. He had 50 kilos there, and so he had that. For people that would visit, like you might give somebody a bottle of wine that comes to visit, he would give them a kilo of cocaine, right. So we arrest him, and just to kind of give you a perspective with the difference between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. And I get this question all the time, what did I like best, okay? And I said, well, I love them both for different reasons. I love the strategy of putting together a complex investigation going after really, really big drug traffickers, but you don't get the same tangible reward that you get when you have an immediate impact on somebody you're dealing with community-wise in the street. You break a domestic up, you lock up a robber, you do things like that. Those are the kinds of things it's really a lot different, so the rewards are different. And so what you might see when you see something like that, you might see a cocaine kilogram value go from 18,000 to 23,000, so we're 24 or 25,000. So you had a nationwide impact, but it's not the same thing as the same direct impact that you get when you're working local law enforcement, and you really see the results immediately of what you've done out in the field. So it's just kind of a different mindset, but I love them both because, one, I love the strategy, I love the complexity of putting together cases, but I also love now certainly being back in local law enforcement, the reward that you get by having tangible results from what you do every day in the field.
Yeah, you get that reward every day versus in those long-term investigations where I imagine there's lots of ups and downs.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of work.
I wanted to go back to Cuban Ruben, who got to Cuba. What was his motivation for coming back? How do you all approach those conversations?
That was tough. I mean, we talked to his wife. We knew he had gone back to Cuba, and I just remember, we told the wife, look, he's going to come back, or he's going to get arrested. We're going to find him. It's better if he turns himself in and stands trial. And and he stood trial, and I think he got a lot of time on it. But but we just told the wife, look, he's going to be in Cuba. He's never going to see your kid, his own child, So a lot of it was just appealing emotionally to her to get him to convince him to come on back and turn himself in. And then surprisingly, he did. I would have never thought he would. It was like, whoa, he turned himself in. My goodness, So
yeah, that's what was surprising. I mean, I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get to him in Cuba. I'm sure somebody could probably, but.
Not back then. You
really?
Couldn't, and we'd actually done, when I was in Tampa later on, we had done some loads that they came up from South America that would go through Guantanamo that we would then be able to then control deliver. So it gets kind of complicated, but these are like 400 or 500 kilo loads that we'd fly in from Guantanamo into Tampa, and then usually they went back down to Miami for distribution. But that was the only access that we had at that time to Cuba. When you're talking about late 80s, early 90s, that was about it.
Yeah. So as if, busting drug traffickers in the 80s in Miami is not enough, you had to raise the stakes. So what was the next appointment?
So I ended up going to Karachi, Pakistan. Okay. And so I kind of went those for, believe it or not, more for family reasons than for, it's not the kind of place you really want to take a family. It's certainly not a place you want to vacation at, but quite frankly, it was a better place to live than it would have been to visit, surprisingly. Okay. So the reason, and I was talking to some of the senior guys there, and I had talked to some senior folks in DEA that had always regretted they'd never done an overseas assignment. Mm-hmm. And I didn't, quite frankly, back then, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have all these things. I didn't even really know how many offices DEA had overseas. I knew we had overseas offices, and I'm thinking, well, I know we got one in Rome. I know we got one in Paris. I know we got one, in Colombia and stuff like that. So I'm talking to the senior guys, and he says, if you go overseas, the government pays for your housing. And if you go to a place where it's a bit of a danger, like Pakistan, you get danger pay. And then you get like a little bit of extra stipend because the work week is different because it's a Muslim society. So they don't celebrate on Mass on Sunday. So you work Monday through Saturday or so. I forget exactly what it was. So you actually got a little bit of a bump in your salary because of that. And the benefit of that is that you're able to rent your house out and develop equity while you're overseas and have your housing paid for. And usually they have, even in Karachi, you had an American school. You have either international schools, American schools, and schools are usually pretty good. They're very, very competitive schools. Some have international baccalaureate programs and also they're really pretty good. So I'm kind of looking at these things, and I remember trying to, because I'm thinking to myself, like, this might be a way to kind of catch up financially, get us a little bit more solid, and, and it'd be an interesting experience for us. So back then, I didn't, you didn't have any way of kind of researching like instantaneously like you do now. So I would go to the library and I would get books on like Pakistan and India, because when I talked to the senior guys, I would say, well, yeah, what am I going to do? I'm going to get Rome or something like that. They're like, no, you're not going to get that.
Right. No.
But I'm like, you only got 3 years on the job. And believe it or not, when I put in for it, there were 18 people on the list. I was chosen out of 18 people. That 18 people
for Pakistan.
For Karachi, Pakistan. Yeah, and wow. I mean, it's not even Islamabad. That's Karachi. Okay. So, to try to get my wife to think about it, I would go pick up a book like on India or Pakistan. So they're like, you got to think about Bombay, Mumbai or whatever it is. These are the places you ought to think about. I was like, really? And they're like, yeah. So I started doing some research. I'm like, and I heard that the embassy was, or the consulate was good, that they had the housing was like 5,000 square foot house that we had over there. It's huge, You had the American school right behind us. So I'm thinking to myself, so I go ahead to the library and I would get like a book on Karachi, on Pakistan rather, or a book on India, and I would put it on a coffee table, and
subtle.
My wife, so Ann would look at that and she's like, "What's that?" I'm like, nothing, Then I take that back to the library and I get another book, and I put it on a coffee table. And so after about 3 books, she's like, what the hell's going on here? And I said, hey, look, I'm just kind of looking up something here. I'm just trying to figure out, this and that and all that kind of stuff. So we started talking about it at length, and I obviously didn't think she was all that into it. But when you start looking at all the benefits of it, from a family standpoint, it seemed like, okay, we could make this work. Unfortunately, to go to a place like Karachi, Pakistan, you have to be prepped with a lot of vaccinations, and that was tough, especially at this time I had 3 kids, and my youngest was about 3 years old. So you're talking about shots like yellow fever, gamma globulin, rabies, all these shots. Some of these needles were so long. I remember getting one, I don't know whether it was the yellow fever or whatever, but you could just feel the heat coming through. I think they give it to you in your butt or your thigh, and you can just feel the heat going through your entire body. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, we're putting our kids through all this kind of stuff. I was afraid, really, my youngest son was so small that the needle was going to go through one side of his arm and out the other. I mean, that's how some of these needles were pretty long. So we end up getting all our vaccinations, and we go over there. And it really wasn't bad. I mean, the housing was good. They had a nice. The American school was right behind us. They had a great pool, workout area, a little, a nice gymnasium, I mean, all kinds of stuff. So it really wasn't bad living. But what I found, being now on a source country as opposed to being on the receiving end of a country, was the way that you worked your cases was kind of in reverse. It was really kind of fun, where you could then kind of help direct where a load of heroin was obviously the big problem out of Pakistan at the time, being produced up in Afghanistan, going through the Khyber Pass, coming on down, ultimately going to the Karachi, because you had the airport, seaport. You had a lot of ways of getting it out of Karachi, more so than any place else in Pakistan. So it was always a destination point for the heroin to make its way back to the U.S. or wherever it was going to go. So I found that the work was really quite interesting. And I can remember the first case that we did. I ended up having an informant that could give us that gave us 5 kilograms of heroin. Okay, and he said, "Look, this has got to get delivered to the U.S. Once it gets out there, we'll notify the people who are supposed to pick it up. They'll come down and get it." Well, we were going to send it to New York because we had most of the heroin that was going from the Middle East at the time was going to New York City. And I was working with a case agent there who had formerly been in Pakistan, and he says, he goes, "Hey, Mike, just go ahead and put it in a safe there. What we'll do is a sham delivery here." So what they do is they'll take 5 kilos made up, like whatever flour or whatever it is, and then they'll put enough real heroin in that to make your case. And I said, "Well, wait a minute. If you do that, aren't you going to expose my confidential informant, because they're going to know it was a setup as soon as that deal goes down?" Yeah, but that's the way we do it. So I talked to a friend of mine in Miami, and he says, "Hey, look, Mike," he goes, "what we'll do, we'll fly the dope out here. We'll fly your informant out here. We'll orchestrate it from here so it doesn't burn your informant." So what we did was we went ahead and brought the heroin out
instead of New York.
Yeah, to Miami. So now we go to Miami, and the benefit of doing that was now people that were going to come from New York, you get more evidence when you do this, because now they've got to book plane tickets to come. Yep. You got phone calls going down. You got banking. You got all these kinds of things that are going on now that you can show real intent on them coming down. It's not that, I just happen to be in the same area where the heroin arrives. No, here you got a willful intent to come down and pick this heroin up. So we set up a undercover room, and we end up having the bad guys meet down there, and they meet our informant. And what they do was they call back then while the bad guys are getting the heroin from the informant. They call back to the source of supply and say the deal's good, everything's good, we got the dope, we're getting ready to leave. So then we call, or an informant calls for a cab to take him back to the airport. Well, we're the cab. Okay, so we're the undercover cab, and so they get into the cab. So you got with 3 guys now with 5 kilos of heroin in the backseat of a cab, 1 in the front, 2 in the backseat of a cab. And so then all of a sudden, we have a police officer light up the cab and pull it over, and then ostensibly arrest the driver. So now you got 3 guys in a car with 5 kilos of heroin, and all of a sudden a canine shows up and starts sniffing the stuff like crazy. So now you got them, and you end up taking you arrest them and you take the dope. Now the people in Pakistan think the deal's already done. It's already done. They already called. They got the dope. Everything's fine. So now it looks like these guys and they're waiting on their money. It looks like the bad guys actually ripped them off. Mm-hmm. So we actually did that scenario several times. And one of the bad guys, the very first one, there was a guy named Paul Keano. There was another one, Salvador Gambino. They were all mob connected up there out of New York. And there was another guy, I think, who might have died in prison. I can't recall. But we had 3 of them that were all they were all mobsters out of New York, and that was our very first delivery. And we did some other deliveries subsequent to that, but that was the one that we really got the mob guys out of New York that were picking up the heroin. So that was really interesting. So I really found the work interesting there. It was challenging, but it was fun because you could kind of design the cases. The strategy was really fun to do. So I actually really enjoyed that. And then one of the things that came up while I was out there was so now my wife is pregnant with child number 4. Okay, so the question is do we send her back to have the baby in the U.S. through a medevac, or do we do it in Pakistan? Well, the only hospital in Pakistan was the Aga Khan Hospital in Pakistan, and I was kind of concerned about a couple things. If we were to have the baby there, I was worried about, does that bring dual citizenship and all this other kind of stuff, especially if the government's going to pay to have my wife go back. So she goes back to Rockville, stays with her parents. They have the baby in Montgomery General Hospital there. My son Andrew, who's now an FBI agent, so he goes. So we have our baby there, and then all the stuff starts brewing with Saddam Hussein, the invasion in Kuwait, and where the Muslim society is going to go on this. Well, Pakistan's primarily Muslim, and even though they were an ally of ours, of the U.S., there was some uncertainty as to really where they were going to fall in on this. Whether they were going to get and be in favor of Saddam Hussein, whether they're going to be in favor of the U.S. doing the invasion, and trying to stop their invasion of Kuwait. So I kept calling back to find out what's going on, because I actually flew back after the baby was born. So now we got 4 kids, okay? And I flew back, and I kept calling back to Pakistan to my boss and saying, hey, look, what's going on? They're like, no, they're not going to do anything here. You're going to be okay. So here we go. I got tons of luggage, a brand new baby stroller, a double baby stroller, and we fly back, and we fly back through Brussels to go back to Pakistan. So it's brand new, and back then, when it's not like we had a lot of money, back then this really nice, fancy new double stroller gets stolen on the way. Half my luggage doesn't make it. And then as soon as we land, and the little luggage that we did get, I'm seeing it on the turnstile in the airport in Karachi. One of the guys from the CIA, who I know, Dave, comes up to me, and he looks at me and he says, what are you doing here? And I said, what? And he goes, they're going to start evacuations tomorrow.
Oh, my God.
So I had just flown with my family across the planet to go to a place that we're going to have to fly right back. And so we do a claim for the luggage. We never got it. And we had to immediately, then I had to go out to buy the biggest suitcases I could to try to pack up as much as we could to get the family back out the very next day. I mean, it was brutal. Absolutely brutal on the family. How my wife is still with me after all these years, I don't know. So we ended up packing all this stuff up. I called my dad, and even calling from there, it was almost like a party line. If you wanted to call from Karachi, this is before you had cell phones and everything else. They were only just starting to come available. We didn't have them. You had a phone in the house, and you would actually have to go through an operator, and sometimes you get on a call, and they might call you back in an hour. You might say, look, place a call to such and such, and then your phone an hour later would ring, and then half the time you get on, there'd be other people on the line like, you get off the phone, no, you get off the phone, it was crazy. Okay. Yeah. So I finally get to get a hold of my dad, and I said, hey, Dad, Ann and the kids stayed for 6 months with her family up in Rockville. Would you all mind taking us in Florida? And he said, no, that's no problem. You just come in, and so I just remember we land, and he pulls up in the car with a U-Haul trailer on the back to throw all this luggage in. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty tough transition. And then we did, and we stayed in their house, which was pretty tough. We got 4 kids. They're in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the Atlantic, Florida. So it was pretty cramped quarters. So it was nice of them to tolerate us for as long as they did until, and I had to ultimately go back to Pakistan, reopen the office up. And in the meantime, they asked me if I wanted to stay or go, if I wanted to stay there. And I said, well, where would I go if I come out? And they said, well, you got a good reputation. You're doing a good job. We can either give you Knoxville, Tennessee, or Tampa, Florida. So I actually did a little research and talked to some people, and they're like, Tampa's probably more active, probably more like where you'd want to be, good family, good place to be. So we decided to go to Tampa, Florida, and it was good because my wife was back there, so she could actually, while she's staying with my parents, drive across the state, look at homes that we were thinking about buying and all that. So we were able to kind of get the ball rolling on that. Very, very tough transition. I look about some of the sacrifices that our family has made for this career have been astonishing, quite frankly, and for her be such an integral part of that and put up with that. I mean, you talk about a trooper. She's a trooper.
Yeah.
To do all that.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions. I wanted to just kind of set the time a little bit. So what year was it when you were in Pakistan?
I was in Pakistan 89 through 91.
Okay. And when you all were there, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the supply side. Was your motivation kind of the impact your work would have stateside and the drug traffickers there, or was it to disrupt supply, or were you leveraging that supply in order to do what it was you wanted to do in the U.S.?
Yeah, so you're actually leveraging the supply to impact the what's going on in the U.S. You're not going to stop. You're not going to stop the production. That's what they made. That's how they made their money. These farmers had nothing else going for them, so they would produce heroin. They grow the poppy. They score the poppy plants. They make the heroin. They bring it back. So the question is how do we identify and arrest the people that are going to go after these drugs anyway, and quite frankly make it orchestrate a little bit easier for them to maybe do it, but to be an integral part of the process. And then so it's they have to have the desire and the will and usually the history before they do something like this. So it's not entrapment. I mean, you have to get into when you start looking at the laws, it's not entrapment if they've got the desire and the will and have shown an interest in doing this, have done it before. And
they're going to do it anyway.
They're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So the question is can we do it with them and then arrest them?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very viable way of getting them arrested.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when your wife was pregnant, did the kids go back, or they stayed with you in Pakistan?
They stayed in the U.S. So what happens? We did the medevac. So she had the 3 kids in Rockville with her, and then she had the baby on the 4th. It would have been tough for them to stay in Pakistan for me. For me to try to do the
clarify
job.
That.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just want to point out that I cannot believe the level of sacrifice that you have made your family and that agents do.
Yes.
And it's not, I'm sure unique to you and you guys. This is what happens to all agents that sign up for this job. And I just want to say that that's incredible that you all they all do this work. Right. I mean, the trade-off is a salary. You can have a salary anywhere, and so to me, it sounds like you just really have to want to improve the world in some way.
Absolutely.
That's your motivation.
Absolutely. It's all about service.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And for some, that's everything.
Right.
And I believe that is that's true for a lot of people.
Sure.
And so I'm glad people like you are out there.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, so now we're getting stateside again, Tampa. So talk a little bit about what's going on there in the U.S. at this point. It's early 90s.
Yeah, right? So the crack epidemic was really starting to take off. It had started a little bit when I was in Miami before I went overseas, but the bigger problem was always the major big loads of cocaine, and then it started evolving into crack, which was more done in the inner cities and Miami, Hialeah, stuff like that. But no less dangerous. I mean, so it was like the different clientele that were involved in that, all very dangerous. When I got to Tampa, we kind of did a variety of like everything. I would say that we had crack cases that we were working down in Bradenton and Sarasota, so we were regularly doing undercover buys and going after crack traffickers at the time. We did some bigger cases, as I mentioned, flew down to Guantanamo a couple of times and brought in huge loads of cocaine that we would then work with our, with our local counterparts, customs, and get the bad guys to come up, pick the stuff up, and take it down to Miami, and then arrest them either when they're distributing it or along the way, whatever the case is. And you always try to get these people to flip. The one thing that was always good about the federal system is that you had minimum mandatories on the sentences. So you could actually, it's like when you wanted to get somebody to cooperate, the system sold itself. You didn't have to try to beg somebody or play a Sipowicz on somebody and, harass them to get them to cooperate. You pretty much would say, hey, look, we caught you with this much dope. Fact is, you're going to get 30 years. You're going to get 20 years. You're going to get 30 years. That's it. The only way that you're going to get out of that is to give us the people that gave it to you and the people that you're going to deliver it to, that kind of thing. So you always had an angle. I mean, the drug trafficking is just it's just several links in a chain, and it depends on where you want to go. And you want to go to the top of the chain as much as you can. And the way to get there is sometimes you take out the links in the middle. And if you can do that, and people know, no, it's a fact. There's no discussion here. You're going to end up doing 20, 30 years for this violation, And by the way, I'm looking at going through your wallet here, and I see pictures of your wife and kids and stuff like that. You can say goodbye to them. You're not going to see them again, And it was interesting. And then you could get cooperation that way. Not quite the same anymore. And that's one of the things that's a downside of not having minimum mandatories. And to us, that was the leverage. That was the leverage in the federal system to really get people to flip and to take out bigger chunks of these major organizations. If you don't have that leverage, you really lose a lot when it comes to these investigations. So, but anyway, so in Tampa, so worked, cocaine trafficking. We worked, marijuana trafficking. I mean, generally, we didn't go after marijuana unless you're getting it, obviously, by the bales and stuff like that. Crack trafficking in Sarasota and about everything else you could. And what I found in Tampa was we worked a lot more, I would say, more closely with our local counterparts there, because Miami was, honestly, cases were happening so fast and furious. You just grab a handful of guys from your group and go out and do them. It wasn't quite the same in Tampa, where you pretty much had to work a lot with your local law enforcement, your kind of like when I was telling you about Baltimore before, us going out, working with the DEA, your relationships had to be strong locally with your local counterparts, because you just didn't have the manpower to do these things on your own. So Tampa was kind of like that. It wasn't nearly as big as Miami. It was at the time I went there, it was a regional, regional office. So it was, I don't know, we probably had 30, maybe 40 agents there, where in Miami you had hundreds, hundreds of agents. So it was all kind of different, but it was good. It was good work. And it was, while I was there, I'd put in for, several supervisory jobs, very competitive. In the meantime, I think my last year in Tampa, before I ultimately got promoted to go to McAllen, Texas, I went ahead and put in for the SNOWCAP program, and that's where you go down to basically South America, Bolivia, Peru, where you pretty much go and blow up landing strips and some of these things where you're getting in shootouts with the drug traffickers and the producers down there. And the training was in Fort Benning, Georgia, so it was similar to very, very similar to Ranger training. So I went, I did the 10-day Hell Week. So apparently DA doesn't know how long a week is, so they call it the Hell Week, but it was 10 days. So you go down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I don't know if you're familiar with Ranger training, but I remember the first day, you had to do a 7-mile rucksack hike. You had to do a water exercises where they would give you a rubber M16. You had to swim the length of the pool. Then they take you to the water park, where you're up 30, 35 feet on walking on a plank over water with steps in the middle. And while you're walking, somebody's climbing a ladder while somebody else is hanging, getting ready to drop in the water. So while you're doing this, it's swaying. And so it was really rough training. And a lot of people crapped out during the training. Now I went and I made it through the Hell Week to go back to the regular 6-week training that gets you to as part of the program. And they were having a problem getting people to go through this, and a lot of people, they were like giving them quick promotions. Well, I was already a GS-13. I was already like as high as I'm going to get without being a supervisor. So I didn't do it for that reason. I didn't need to get a promotion. But I wanted to experience it. I thought it would be really pretty neat stuff. And as I went back to the 6-week training, I ended up, one of the things you had to do is in a sand pit, or actually a sawdust pit, was pugil stick fight. And I remember hitting this guy with a puzzle stick, and my thumb got caught like in his helmet, and ended up breaking my thumb. And once you broke a bone, you're pretty much out. They cast you up, and it's like you can't do the rest of the program. And it was at that same time that we had a plane that went down in Lima, Peru, and one of my classmates, Meredith Thompson, was killed in that. And she was also out of Miami, in the Miami Field Division, and we'd actually run the Orange Bowl Marathon together. She was really quite an athlete, much better athlete than me. And I remember asking her before I went through the program, I said, "What's tougher, the marathon or this program?" She says, "Mike, this program is pretty tough, So, but because of that, they canceled the program. There was a lot of complaints by the agents in charge of these different field offices because you go through the program and then you're TDY all the time. You're constantly on travel, and so you're not contributing anything to the office. You're on their table. You're on the table of organization, but you're never there because you're down in South America someplace. So after that plane crash, the then administrator Tom Constantine said, "That's it. We're done with this. We're done with this program." And it ended that quick. Snap of a finger, that program was over. And
so what was the goal of that program?
It was to disrupt the cocaine trafficking. It was to disrupt it at its source. Okay, so you would have where they would actually produce the cocaine in the mountains of Bolivia and Peru and all that. They produce it. And so they always had like these grass landing strips or these like really kind of makeshift landing strips. And you had to have a landing strip in order to fly these smaller planes in and out to load them up. And so they, so if you're blowing them up, you're blowing up the runways, whatever you call a semblance of a runway, and that's full of all kinds of holes and stuff like that. They can't land the planes, So that's one of the things you would do besides maybe going and finding a lab and setting it on fire,
So you're out there sabotaging.
Exactly. That's really what it was.
Right.
So you can't use the military for that because of posse comitatus. So what you have to do is you have to train agents to go down to South America to do military operations because you can't send the military down there to do military operations. So you're actually doing some very fundamental military activities, and you're not really doing complex investigations, which was kind of the argument too. It's like, wait a minute, we train you all to do these complex investigations, and all you're doing is going down there blowing up landing strips, But there's a purpose to everything. I mean, and the purpose was to try to stop.
Sure, that's to get in front of it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly right.
What was the posse comitatus?
Posse comitatus means that you can't use military action in a civilian environment. Okay.
Oh, see.
So unless you like
engage in war,
unless you're unless you're going to engage in war, you can't really do that. So we're not there. We're fighting a drug war, but it's not considered a war.
Right.
So.
Right.
So anyway, so I do that time in Tampa, Florida, and then I get a promotion to McAllen, Texas.
So in order to get a promotion, you have to leave. Is that generally the case? You have to go someplace else?
No, I would say that it's kind of interesting. Is my little gripe about DEA is that they used to have a system where they looked at the complexity of your cases, they looked at your reputation, they look at your diversity of background, all the different places that you've been, and that's how they would basically kind of score you out on a sheet, And then they went to an assessment center, which is really kind of common practice. Probably starting in the mid '80s. DEA finally picked it up where you do a battery of skills. You do an inbox, you do an interview, you got a problem employee, you do a couple of exercises. Really hasn't changed in the last 30 years or so. It's very similar even in local law enforcement. But I had done all these moves thinking it was going to help my career, but it didn't really count for anything. Then I take the assessment center, and I did very well in the assessment center. So I had a really high score, but it was very, very competitive. And so I put in for what I could to see what I could get. And I ended up, I remember talking to Ann I said, "Hey, look, do you mind if I put in for McAllen, Texas?" And then she says, "Where's that?" And I said, it's on the border right above Reynosa, Texas. And she's like, "No, you can put in for it." She goes, "You're not going to get it because you don't speak Spanish, Famous last words.
Right.
So then I get it, and it's like, oh my God, of all the things I put in for, I get McAllen, Texas, So the question is, because then I had one of my sons in the IB program, and my daughter. I mean, it was then we had to start, high school all over again for my kids. So we moved down to the, 7 miles north of the border, right there by the Rio Grande, and we always kind of laugh at the Rio Grande. I mean, you think it's a huge river, but you can pretty much some areas you just walk right across. Right, it's real. I mean, you're seeing that now. I was like, I go down there, I'd be like, this is a Rio Grande. But anyway, so we moved down there, and so we're trying to get acclimated to Texas, and it was different. It was very different than any place that we lived before. So now we've moved from Maryland to Miami to Pakistan, back to Tampa, and now we're in South Texas. So it's a very diverse background that our kids are going through here.
Right.
All the different things that they're seeing and experiencing. So we did pretty good with the schools. My son went into a magnet school there. My daughter was happy to be in the high school, and she's in a gifted program there. So she did very well. So I think at this point I got 4 kids. Okay, so my wife gets pregnant again when we're in Texas. So now we got number 5 coming. And so he's
one for each posting.
Just pretty much,
right.
Yeah. So actually we call them phase 1 and phase 2. We had 3 before I went to DEA, and then the subsequent the DEA. So we call them phase 1 and phase 2 kids. So we're there, and so she gets pregnant there, and actually my son Ryan born in the Rio Grande Hospital. So he's born down there, and I don't think the family. The work was tough. I had some management problems down there. Not me personally as a manager, the employee problems I had to deal with as a manager, and it was pretty tough. It was a rude awakening to the amount of difficulty you can have with problem employees. So I had to pretty much take this thing on, which was so consuming. And what I found was in down there in McAllen, Texas, you could make cases. I mean, generally you wanted as a group to, there really wasn't a stat, but you always wanted as a group in a year at least make 100 arrests of bad guys. Okay. So in South Texas, that was easy to do because the Border Patrol would get these guys that are floating marijuana bales over the Rio Grande, and they come over as soon as they get on the shore, boom, you lock them up. We get the dope. We got to hold on to the dope. They make the arrest. We end up taking custody of the arrest because now we're doing an onward investigation. So we get credit for the arrest. It's one of the things I don't really know how it's all worked, because I think they get credit for the arrest. We get credit for the arrest. And then if you have state locals, they take credit for the arrest. So one person may have been arrested like 5 times,
right.
Or been reported arrested 5 times when it was really one arrest, So anyway, so we have, we would get our stats down there, but I was used to these complex cases. One of the things I did in Miami, we did a wiretap. We did a wiretap on the Cali cartel, complex wiretap. We did, setting up cameras, on buildings and, motion detector, all kinds of stuff. Okay. So I get to McAllen, and the cases were really simple. I mean, and I'm like, I thought we could do a little better than that, and I met with some resistance, because a lot of those guys, they called them border rats. If you were born there, you wanted to stay there, stay on the border, you didn't want to get promoted, you could pretty much stay there a career, because a lot of people didn't want to go down there, and the people that were down there didn't want to move out, so it was, so if you were kind of a sort of like an innovative or a mover and a shaker, you really weren't all that welcome there, at least as a supervisor. I mean, it's changed a lot, but back then it was kind of like this: leave us alone. We get enough arrests. We got to keep keep people off our backs. We're doing what we got to do. Don't try to do anything more than that. And I would look and I'd see some of the things they did. I thought were kind of dangerous, the way they handled their informants and stuff like that. And I'd be like, no, we got to make sure we do a better job. So anyway, so I had some difficult leadership and personnel problems down there that we resolved, and we got them all squared away. But it was difficult, and that has an impact on you and your family and everything else. So it was kind of like, wow. So we're looking again, like, okay, well, maybe it's time. I didn't think anybody was all that happy down there. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad post, but we're like, well, maybe we go back overseas again. So I put in, and I get Seoul, Korea. So we're like, okay, so this ought to be.
How long were you in Texas then?
In Texas, about 2.5, close to 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
By the time.
I just wanted to, before we jump into Korea, what do you see different in the conditions that officers are facing today down on the border than when you were down there? And what year was that?
I was in Texas from 95, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I think 95 through 98.
Mm-hmm.
96, 95 through 98, I think. So, so the conditions were not nearly as bad as they are now. I would say right now you've gotten a lot more. It's different. I mean, back then you would have been the cocaine coming across, methamphetamine coming across the border in Mexico. What happened was out of Colombia, where all the cocaine was being produced, they used to pretty much bring it through the Bahamas. And even when I was in Miami, I had a chance to fly in helicopters, and we did Operation Bahamas, and targeting Bahamas, and we try to go after go-fast boats and all that kind of stuff. So back then, the cocaine was coming through the Caribbean and getting up to Miami. Well, what happened was they decided to start, the traffickers started putting it through Mexico, and the way that they would pay the Mexicans that would traffic the cocaine through Mexico and across the border wasn't in money, but it was cocaine. So you got like 100 kilos. It's like, okay, we'll give you 10 kilos if you get the 90 kilos across the border, So that was your payment. So now you can sell those 10 kilos. Now you become a drug trafficker to support other drug traffickers. So they're getting paid in kilograms. And then what happens is they start developing their own business, and then they become less and less, and the Colombians become less and less dependent on having to do their own sales in the U.S. So they then become more like it's like a division of labor. So they become more of a supplier for the Mexicans to bring the cocaine over. And the Mexicans then become your biggest traffickers going across Sinaloa cartel. All these folks, they become your bigger traffickers, where the cocaine now is almost just being exclusively produced in Colombia. But now the Mexicans have gotten involved in the process, and to the point where they are now basically the traffickers, with Colombia being the suppliers, So we saw cocaine coming across the border. I would say mostly marijuana, and you talk about bales of marijuana. I mean, tons of marijuana were coming across regularly across that border. So that was really kind of where we were on, with all that. Very, very busy area, but you didn't have the same border issues that you do now. Now you're looking at, first of all, you can traffic fentanyl, and you can get a lot more. I mean, you're talking about pills. I mean, you can do a lot more damage in a much smaller quantities, and it's a lot easier to conceal. And now the border pretty much is wide open. Back then it wasn't. I mean, you actually had Border Patrol, you had Customs and Enforcement, you had all these different things that were part of the fight. And now it's almost like they're precluded from being a part of that fight. And so the border's wide open, and when you got it's easier because the amounts are smaller. There's a lot less scrutiny at the border. A lot more people are coming across the border, so it's harder to fight. Back then, so I would say, like right now, in some ways it's a lot worse as far as the flow of people and drugs coming over. Back then, it was more of a combative role. I mean, we were trying to stop these people from coming over, And even a place like McAllen, where you could get like a day pass, if you were a Mexican and you wanted to come over and work in the border along the South Texas, didn't really start till Falfurrias. When you get up 40 miles north going towards Corpus Christi is really where the border office was. So you could pretty much go back and forth with a day pass back and forth between Mexico and the U.S. and do your business there in the U.S. So it was pretty interesting. But I would say it was just a lot different than it is now. I'd say right now, I don't know that it's more dangerous, because I think there's a lot less confrontation on the border. It's dangerous that people are coming across the borders. They're going through Arizona and all these other places and getting caught up in the, in the heat and those massive fields and all that kind of stuff. But down there, when you're talking about the Rio Grande, I think it's actually pretty easy to cross, a lot less confrontation, easier to get drugs over. So the problem is worse. The ability for law enforcement to take it on, more difficult. The administrative support that you need to do this, not as much as it used to be. I mean, there used to be a real concerted effort. When you go back to the Vice President George Bush and you look at some of these activities that were going on, and the fights against drugs were taken a lot more seriously than they are now. I mean, because things have evolved into counterterrorism and all that. So things have changed. Priorities have changed, and it's unfortunate because you do have so many people that are dying now because of drugs coming over the border. So I'd say the problem is a lot worse now. Our ability to do something about it, we're a lot more hampered than we were, which probably keeps law enforcement may be a little bit safer because you're not going to get in the confrontations that you would have before.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you're now going to Seoul, Korea.
Seoul, Korea.
Yeah. And how was that position differently?
That position was different. Okay, so I'm getting ready to go to Seoul, Korea, and you're working at the embassy, and it's taken a while to get the funding. They always got the appropriations and the, you got the continuing resolution, and I get selected, and we got to wait another couple months, before get your orders, another couple months, and then at the last minute, and there was not a language requirement there, and then then about a month before I'm ready to go, I'm waiting to get my orders. They say, "Oh, good news for you," and I'm like, "Oh, I get my orders." Like, no, we got funding for language school. And I was like, "Oh, you're kidding me! You're kidding me! Now I've got to go to language school to go to Seoul, Korea." So language school is done up here in Arlington, Virginia. I don't know, Department of Defensive Language Services or something like that. So I'm like, oh my God. So they said, look, we aren't going to send you till you get to a level 1 in Korean. And level 1 is just basic Korean. It's enough to know to not know what you're saying. It's enough to stagger through, maybe get a cab ride, maybe order some food, that kind of stuff. But the Korean language is a level 5 difficulty. I mean, it is extraordinarily hard. It's as hard for Koreans to learn, American English as it is for us to learn Korean. Extremely difficult. A lot of particulars in the language. So now, what this does is this puts my son midway through his junior year of high school. If I can get through it quick enough, we can move mid-year from Texas to Seoul, Korea. So we were like, I was thinking about whether just pulling out, just saying, forget it, we're not going to do it, And like, no, we got it. Let's do it. It'll be good. So we decide as a family, okay, let's do this. So my son, we have to move him in his mid-year of his junior year, and it's kind of funny because we land in Seoul, Korea, coming from McAllen, Texas. We're in t-shirts and stuff. I mean, it's snowing. I mean, and we don't have any winter clothes because we're coming out of South Texas, coming from Tampa to South Texas. I mean, every place we were was hot. I mean, I tell you, it was like even in Karachi, Pakistan. I mean, literally, you could fry an egg on a car in the summertime. I mean, it was that hot, and so we're like, scrambling the next day at the PX to try to get some coats and all this other kind of stuff. It was just crazy. So we land in Seoul, and I just remember going to the house and looking out, and you see all the Asian rooftops with the tile rooftops, and it's snowing. I'm like, my God, what do we do? So here we go again, another adventure. So, but my kids my oldest son went to, and my oldest daughter went to the Seoul Foreign School. My next son went to the American school on base. And then my other kids went to the American schools. So Seoul Foreign School, a lot of the Korean culture, very, very hardworking culture. I mean, very, very dedicated to academics, very dedicated to just a work ethic that's really like, from what I've seen internationally, it's like second to none. I mean, they really put a lot of effort into everything that they do. So we're there in Seoul, Korea again. My son starts classes, and thank God. I mean, these kids, they went through a lot. Okay, so he's starting classes, and I remember once in a while I wake up at 2 a.m, get a drink of water or something like that, and I see the lights on in his bedroom. I'm like, Patrick, what are you doing? He goes, I'm studying. I'm like, it's 2 a.m. He goes, yeah, I got a test tomorrow. I mean, so wow. They worked really, really hard. Yeah. So it was a Seoul Foreign School, but it was like Americans. It was like Korean Americans for the most part that went there, or I don't know, but they were very, very driven. The school was extremely driven, and so we had with my oldest son. Okay, so the work there was different. It was more. It was a very good place to live. We were on the base, and once you walked outside the base, you're in Itaewon, and if you saw recently in the news where they had all the crowds and those people got killed up there because they all came out of the same bar, like I don't know. I mean, down at the red light district down there, but Itaewon was like the shopping area just outside. So in other words, you're you were on a military base, even though embassy housing was on a military base, and you had everything at your fingertips. You had video stores, you had a movie theater, you had the gym, you had the schools, you had all these kinds of things. And then you walk outside the base and you're in Korea. So it's like you're in America, and then you walk outside and you're in Korea. It was really kind of an interesting mix of both worlds. And on the base, you're dealing in U.S. currency, and you go out and then you're dealing won, I guess it was what it was. So we were pretty. So it was pretty good. A pretty good assignment. My son did very well, and he had actually, you know, I remember talking to him. You know, when we lived, because growing up in Maryland, he had been to the Naval Academy and seen that, and we actually introduced the idea of maybe going to a military academy, and he was like, well, the only one I'll go to if I get is the Naval Academy. It's the only one I'm going to put in for. Never thinking he would actually get it. Okay, so he gets notified. So we're in Seoul, and I get to then declare my home of record. And so I declare my home of record as Florida because my parents are down there. Don't have a house now. Sold a house in Texas. Don't have a house now, and there's no state tax. Okay, so I can claim that as my home of record. And for my son, it just so happens a little bit less competitive to get a congressional nomination in a place like Brevard County, Florida, than it is in, say, this area up here, right, Loudoun County or Fairfax County or whatever, because everybody in D.C. area, they either know of or are familiar with or a family member of a general, an admiral, a member of Congress or whatever. Extremely, extremely competitive. So he killed it on the SAT test and stuff like that. And my father, when we were in Seoul, I had just gotten to Seoul, Korea, and we were there for like about 2 weeks, okay, trying to get adjusted. And I get the phone call. My father had passed away unexpectedly, back in Florida. So I flew back and had to work through the funeral arrangements and all that kind of stuff. And it just so happened when I was back there, Congressman Dave Weldon had like one of these academy days where you go up and you get to see, Coast Guard Academy, Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, all those kinds of things. So I go up there to see all this, and I get the brochures, and I get to meet the people that are in charge of the process. And I said, well, we're in Korea, but our home of record is here. And so I start sending, that was back then before we started having, you could start using the internet and all that, but it wasn't used very much. And so I remember taking my son every time he would get an award or whatever the case is, some recognition, I would fax it to the congressman's office so that they would have a file. They were keeping a file on him, and then he kills it on the SAT test. And I don't think he thought he was going to get in. He got in on the first round. They grabbed him like a snap, and so he didn't really want to go. And we're like, no, Patrick, you're talking about a $500,000 education here. You need to rethink this. So he did. And then as he's in, he's talking about, they talk about 5 and dive. You're going to do your 5-year commitment and get out. And he would talk about that. Well, no, I'll do it. But he's still in. He's a commander now. And, they just transferred command of the USS Arleigh Burke, but he was the commander of a destroyer out in Rota, Spain. He's still out in Spain. So here's a kid that wasn't sure he wanted to do it. Then he does it, and he ends up falling in love with the mission. So sometimes it takes a little while to get acclimated to the environment. You say, wait a minute, this is a pretty good thing. It's a pretty good thing. And it's kind of funny because we've had several members of the family follow similar sequences there, when it comes to that. But anyway, back to Seoul, the drugs over there, pretty much methamphetamine, China, that kind of stuff. Not so much. It was a very good family place to live. The office was me and a Foreign Service national. That was it. I was able to, fortunately, they had a program over there where they would fly instructors in for your master's program, and they had both University of Texas and they had Troy State University, which is now Troy University out of Alabama. And I remember I was going to sign up for the University of Texas and for my master's, and the woman said, hey, look, they just lost the contract. The only one they're going to have is Troy University. So I said, okay. And so I signed up and I started working my master's over there. And while I was over there, ended up taking another promotional test and not thinking much about it. And then I get a call, hey, you put in for this. Are you interested in being the chief of DEA's public affairs? And I'm like, that's another adventure, So I was like, yeah, why not? So So anyway, we ended up having to cut our tour a little bit short. I felt bad for my daughter because almost like the day DEA was nice enough to allow me. I got promoted like in December, and they allowed me to wait until like May till my daughter graduated. But they're like, we're not going to give you much more time than that. Mm-hmm. So my daughter graduated, and we had to immediately fly out. So it was pretty tough on her. She didn't get to stick around for her parties with her friends and all that kind of stuff. But and by that time, she had actually gotten accepted in ROTC program. She was really on the cusp of the Naval Academy herself, and made it down to the last wire and then didn't get in. And so we came back. So it was really kind of hectic when we moved back to, this time we're in Stafford, Virginia. You know, I looked around, I talked to people, where can I go? And they're like, you ought to think about this area. Tough area with I-95, as you know from being in this area. That whole Virginia corridor going north in the morning is a disaster. So, but anyway, so we end up there buying a house in Stafford. I was under construction by the time we got here. It was pretty much, by the time we got back, it was pretty much done. So now I'm with Chief of Public Affairs for DEA, and that's not just like a field office. That's Chief of all the public affairs for DEA. You know, pretty heavy load. I mean, it was baptism by fire. And I look at that job and I think to myself, like, you know, it was tough. I mean, because all of a sudden, because people don't realize, I mean, all they think is, oh, you're the face of the agency, or you're going to be this or that. And, you know, you get to introduce the administrator, whatever the case is. The hard part about that job is you pretty much had to field all the calls that came in about everything from how many offices do you have and what are the qualifications, to like, hey, you know, we heard that your guys were down in Roanoke, Virginia, spinning a gun on a bar, and wherever the barrel pointed is who's buying the drinks. You're like, oh my God! So all of a sudden, you got to now be the expert. You got to, what are they talking about? Who did what? What can we release? What can't we release? Is it under investigation? You know, are people being disciplined? Or, you know, all kinds of stuff like this. You know, and then now you're looking at a global agency, and the amount of things that can go wrong across the globe, and all of a sudden, Chief of Public Affairs got to answer questions for it, you know. So we would get these questions, and I remember specifically one of the toughest things I had to do. So I'm there trying to learn the ropes there, and really no help. It's like, it was like really baptism by fire. It really was. We had an informant by the name of Andrew Chambers. Okay, so Andrew Chambers had worked cases across the country. The guy was like smooth, could get in, African-American male, could get into organizations. If you're having a hard time getting deals done, he's the kind of guy you could kind of introduce some way or another. You know, for example, just to give you an idea how crafty this guy was, there was a case that they couldn't get. They knew a guy that owned a car wash was dealing drugs. I don't know if it's St. Louis or something like that. And they couldn't get into this guy. So they talked to Andrew Chambers. He's like, I'll get into him. Okay. So what he does is he takes his car to the car wash, you know, has him clean it, vacuum it, says, okay, it's fine, give me the keys, rides it around, goes back and says, okay, I want you to wash it again. I want you to vacuum it out. Like, we just did that. It's completely clean. It's like, just do it again. Okay. So they do it, and they wash the car, they clean it out, they vacuum it, all kind of stuff. Comes back, he goes, okay, I want you to run it through another time, you know. Like, what the heck are you talking about? So they end up telling the boss, who's a drug trafficker, who's like, that guy's trying to clean his car. He's afraid of the scent. He's afraid the dogs are going to hit on it and stuff like that. So he was able to get into it for something as simple as that, you know. So this guy was a really crafty informant, okay? So what happened was, apparently, and he was involved in cases across the country. So what we're trying to do with what he does in one of the cases, he's on the stand, and apparently he got a summons for soliciting a prostitute someplace, I don't know where, and then he was on the stand, and he said that he had a college degree, an associate's degree, which he did, and he was working on, but he didn't have. So all of a sudden they say, wait a minute, he was arrested, he had this summons, and by the way, he doesn't have an associate's degree. So they decide nationwide that they're going to shut down any case that he testified in. Okay, so now so you talk about a nationwide thing, wow. Okay? So our chief of operations at the time gets interviewed by Connie Chung on this, and you know, and he's like, well, I didn't really know much about it. And they're like, well, didn't you sign this memo? You know, it's like one of those 60 Minutes where they come in on you, you know. So I come into DEA, I come into as the chief of public affairs when this is kind of going on, and it looks like we've probably gotten past past the hump on this thing, okay? And I remember we're still doing the internal report on this, and I'm getting a call from this lady from the Washington Post who's asking me like every day, where's the report? I'm like, we're working on it. It finally comes out. I heard the report's out. We're working on redactions and all this other kind of stuff. So I just remember, going through all this, and I remember telling her one time, I said, look, why are you even doing a story on this? This story's over. And she says to me, she goes, I'll tell you when a story's over. I'm like, oh man, well, I am now learning about the media. I am really now learning about the media. Okay. Right. So we do this, and I just remember, so she gets the report. It's redacted, but it's like 160 pages, So she's asking me a question. She's like, well, page 12 says this, and then it contradicts itself, because then you got on page 72 it says that, and I'm flipping through trying to look at these pages, and and then she says, well, and I said, look, all I know is our guys acted above board with everything, we can't control what the informant does, but we did everything. She says, well, I don't know, it says here that your guy knew, and he didn't say this, he didn't say that, blah blah blah. So she's kind of going, and if you look at this part of the report and that part of the report. So I said, hey, okay, maybe it wasn't one of our better days. That quote shows up on the front page of the Washington Post. I was like, oh my God. And I'm like, not one of DEA's better days, I'm
right.
like, oh man, so I had to take it. I took that one in the shorts, and I'm like, and I remember one of the senior guys asked me, what the hell did you say that for? And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll put you at my desk and you can talk to this woman for the next 3 months and see how easy you think it is, Right. Yeah. So I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about the media in that job, and it was a rough job, but you had to be very quickly an expert on everything. And so that's why that was such a difficult job. But, and I would say that anybody that doesn't, if you think that's going to be an easy job, or you look at these guys, look at these guys, they're the public affairs guys, all they got to do is wear the suit and all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, let me tell you something, man, that was the toughest job. And because you had to be an expert quickly on everything. And I learned more in the 3 years I did that, especially when I come in like with Asa Hutchinson, who's just now stepping down as the governor of Arkansas.
That's right.
He was a congressman, and he became the DA administrator. Then he went to Homeland Security. Very, very, very good communicator. And we had an administrator before that who came up through the ranks, who we were very proud of, did a really good job. But he didn't have that finesse that you get really from being in a political environment, being able to answer questions on the stump and stuff like that. And I remember O'Reilly asking for an interview with him, and he was like, I had no problem, because O'Reilly at the time, if you remember the O'Reilly factor, at the time, I used to see him when I was in Seoul, Korea, but he wasn't part of the cable network up here when I first got in 2000 up to DEA headquarters, and then they ultimately got him on. But I remember the then administrator asked me, he says, "Hey, look, so we tried to prep him as best we can, and so just before we're getting ready to go down to the studio for him to get on, online." He says, "Hey, Mike," he goes, "do you have any video of O'Reilly?" And I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Yeah, but we're kind of running a little bit late." No, he goes, "I want to see the video." I'm like, oh. So we put O'Reilly on, and he sees O'Reilly just going after this guy, and then all of a sudden the administrator's nervous, okay? And so we get down there, and it was right when the movie Traffic with Michael Douglas had come out, and it was and with the ostensibly the premise of the interview was going to be like, how accurate did that portray DEA? So he's asked a question, administrator, what do you guys doing a great job, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, it's pretty accurate. And then the next question O'Reilly asks is, so tell me something, why can't your guys carry guns in Mexico? It's like the most dangerous place on the planet. Your guys can't carry guns down there. Now you're getting into a security issue that none of us expected. And he actually got nervous, visibly nervous. Well, and he kind of started, and he recovered. He recovered. But I was like to myself, I'm thinking, oh my God, I just lost this job. Okay. Well, he ends up leaving. A new administration comes in. So you go from Clinton to Bush. Okay. And so now, Asa Hutchinson comes in, and I remember getting a question from O'Reilly. Will you talk to? I said, Mr. Hutchinson, he's like, Mike, I know Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, I'll get on his TV show. I got no problem with that. So we take him down there, and he's on the stool, and I'm wired to a microphone not too far from him, and I'm just like cringing, and I'm like, oh my God, what's he going to ask? And I would ask Asa, hey, what do you need from me? And he's like, just give me a couple talking points, a couple bullets, tell me what the latest news is on the drug war and stuff like that, So I'd give him what I could, and we get down there, and I just remember he's on the stool. I learned a lot from this. So he's on the stool, and there, he's got the cameras on, and Raleigh says, "Hey, love you guys, what you do, great mission, blah blah blah, congratulations." He goes, "How you liking it so far?" It's like, "I'll tell you something, Bill." He goes, "I just came back from the Arkansas Watermelon Festival. It was a great event, great family event, blah blah blah." So then he goes, and then he hits him with, I forget what the question was, hits him with some hard question. And what I learned from this is, so Asa Hutchinson says, he goes, Bill, he goes, that is a great question. He goes, but a better question is, and then he goes ahead and throws his own question out to answer his own question.
Right.
And I was like, man, he just flipped O'Reilly. He just flipped Bill O'Reilly on this. And I'm watching, I'm like, man, this is masterful. So you could see the difference between a career politician, and I'm all for people that have worked their way through the ranks, but to see that and see the difference between a little bit politics and administration and that kind of thing, it was really kind of an interesting thing to me. But Asa really had a very good ability to never afraid to deal. I mean, I'd go in there and it's like, sir, WTOP wants to talk to you. Like 8:35, it's like 8:30. It's like, oh, Mike, tell him I'll do it.
Right.
So anyway, so public affairs, very very interesting assignment for me, and that was right towards the end of my assignment there. I'd gotten selected for Bangkok. So, the first thing I had to do was go to language school. So while I was waiting for language school, I was in public affairs. I had to do about 7 months of language school, which we always did in Roslyn. And I'd already gone through Korean language school to only achieve a level 1 to just get basic Korean under me before I went to Seoul in the past. And I would say that was academically probably the toughest thing I ever did, trying to go to Korean. It's a level 5 difficulty, where Spanish as comparison would be like level 1.
Oh, wow. So
I went to language school for Korean, and I tell people, I would have rather had like a colonoscopy every day than to go to Korean language school. It was rough. 6 hours a day, one-on-one, whiteboard, and then probably 7 or 8 hours of studying a night. I mean, it's total immersion kind of stuff. And so Thai was a level 4, so it was a little bit easier, but not much. But I was there for a longer period of time, where you've got to get kind of basically conversational, not real conversational, but pretty much where you can get around. So while I was waiting to go to language school, I had an opportunity to kind of set up a little bit of the Homeland Security operation, because that's right when President Bush had merged all those different offices under Homeland Security. So you had, and DEA was one of them. So you had several offices that were then located over there by American University. So I was kind of setting up shop there. I had a chance to meet President Bush at the time. He came by and said hi to everybody and thanked them for what they were doing. So I go ahead and I complete language school, and then here's another move. So we go to Bangkok, and we move to an apartment downtown, really, really nice apartment. Bangkok, the area, and when I went there, DEA was in the process of converting their country offices to regional offices. Like, instead of every country office reporting directly to headquarters like I did when I was in Seoul, Korea, you would have a regional director who handled that particular region, like the Far East, where offices from Beijing, China, all the way to the Philippines, Manila, Philippines, down south to Australia, all reported to the regional director in Bangkok. But before that happened, I went there. I went as the assistant country attaché, which just handled Thailand. So I had Chiang Mai, I had Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Loudoun, and Songkhla under my watch there. And as this was converting to a regional shop, it was around the same time that the country attaché, who then became the regional director, Bill Snipes, was getting ready to retire. So then I took over as the acting director for probably about a year and a half of the 3 years or so that I was over there. So I had I had everything from Beijing, China, 15 offices in 13 countries spanning 4 time zones. So I covered everything from Beijing, China, again to Australia, the Philippines, east down Indonesia. So we had everything. It was a big area to cover, a lot to do, and a lot of different cultures. It's interesting when I look at the Asian culture and how grouped it is here in America, and I look at how different those cultures are. I mean, you look at Thailand, for example. It's mostly Buddhism that's there. You go to the Philippines, it's Catholicism. I mean, it's different everywhere. It's Muslim if you go down to Indonesia. So, I mean, it's really quite different. All these places are really quite different, and so you got to kind of understand how those areas work and how it all figures into the pie.
What were some of the day-to-day responsibilities that you had in that way? So covering multiple different countries, time zones, what decisions were you tasked with making during that time?
I would say that the country attachés, when I was there, were still pretty autonomous. I mean, we would have to go out and do self-inspections of their offices. And so I traveled to most of the offices under my watch when I was there to kind of understand them, but to also make sure that they're doing their paperwork right, their informant files are correct, that they're financially, sound, that they're paying not only their bills, but when you're paying informants and making sure that everything is up to snuff and everything else. So I would say it was mostly administrative when I was there. I would say even in Bangkok, it was more administrative because I was a couple levels up from the guys on the street. Okay, so the guys on the street worked a lot with our Thai authorities out there, and I would say at the time, everything prior to that particular time in the early 2000s, Thailand was really known for heroin, for its very potent heroin out there. But it really became sort of a methamphetamine capital. And that was because I think most of the time the heroin, a lot of the production was coming out of Burma. And I think these farmers realized that if you don't do things that are seasonal, you can actually do things all year long. So if you can produce synthetic drugs, and that's what you're seeing right now with the fentanyl, you don't need a growing season, you don't need to score poppy plants, you don't need to do all these kinds of things that are required to make opium, then to make heroin and all that. You can just do it synthetically. So it became quite a methamphetamine production area. But most of the methamphetamine that was being produced out of there was kind of staying over there, or it wasn't really coming. There wasn't much coming to the U.S. It was mostly being circulated throughout the Mideast and the Far East out there, and even in Europe. So, kind of even with the heroin, when I found the heroin when I was in Pakistan, the heroin was mostly the vast majority of the heroin was going to Europe. Not really all that much coming to the U.S.
So, in foreign countries where there is large-scale production of specific drugs,
right,
is it because the authorities there are not trained to stop them from doing that, or are they looking the other way? What's the law enforcement situation in these places, and then how does the DEA have authority to come in and do what they do?
It kind of depends on where you go and what country you're in and what the political leadership is in those countries at a particular time. When I was in Pakistan, for example, the police officers there did not get paid much at all. So there was a lot of corruption. We would find, like, what I found with the Pakistan authorities is often we worked well with them, but I wouldn't find out about a seizure until it was like complete. Okay, so they might come and say, hey, Special Agent Chapman, we just got 2 kilograms of heroin, and then you're kind of hearing on the inside, well, it may have started out like 6 kilograms,
right.
From when it came in over Afghanistan, and they didn't have any money to pay the informant, so they gave the informant 1 kilogram to sell, and then you got to have these cops that are watching it come all the way down. So how do you pay them? So, and I'm not saying it's a culture of corruption, but I'm saying it was just kind of it depended on where you went and what standards that they went by, and it's not a slight to our Pakistan counterparts, because you're going to have corruption in any place, anywhere in the world. But I found it was a little bit more pervasive in some of these places. In Thailand, I found that we did pretty good with the Thai authorities. We had a special investigative unit called an SIU, and these folks were more highly vetted than any other of the other cops, polygraphed and everything else. So they were better to work with, and we provided them with a lot of information, and so we had a pretty good relationship with the Thai authorities. As far as other places, certainly, you go to Australia, which fell under there, which really wasn't obviously not an Asian culture, but obviously good relationships there. Korea now was back under my command from a larger standpoint, so I knew what was going on there in Japan. So it's really all relative to those specific areas. So it's you really talk about an eclectic group of countries, different types of leadership, different types of cultures, different languages, different religions. It was different everywhere that you went. So it was kind of neat to me to just kind of get that kind of overall understanding, but nothing that you can really say specifically to a generic area there and say, oh, this is the biggest problem there and this is how you deal with it, because it was kind of all over the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so were you on a base then in Bangkok? I know you were in Korea, right? But not Karachi?
Yeah, not in Bangkok. So we lived in an apartment right downtown off of Sukhumvit Road, which was a very, very big intersection. So it's kind of funny. I lived about, when we first moved there, I lived about 1.5 miles from the embassy. Or maybe not even that, maybe a mile. And people would say, like, well, how long does it take you to get to work? And I would say, well, it only takes me like 5 minutes to get to work. And I say, oh, okay. And I said, but it takes me like an hour to get home. And they're like, how can that be? I said, well, because they had like 5 lanes going in one direction and 1 lane going in the other direction. And if you got caught in the other direction, which I would on the way home, I mean, the traffic was just, it was crazy.
Because you were going back in the city.
Yeah.
Right, and everybody's leaving at the end
We were
of
in
the
a city, but I was in the city, and then, but I was only about, like I said, about less than 1 mile from the embassy. But to get there, to get out to the road in one direction was fine, but to come home and to try to work your way across the street and then to try to get up on the 1 lane that's going in the other, I mean, it was really tough to get home. It's probably quicker to walk. Sometimes people, even my wife would do this, you get kind of frustrated because of the traffic there and you jump on the back of somebody's motorcycle. They did that all the time. You pay them, 20 baht, $1, something like that, and they'd take you all around town and stuff like that. Very dangerous way to go. It's sort of like a low-scale Uber kind of thing. You just sit there and somebody be on a motorcycle, want to ride, you jump on and you go. It was the quickest way to get around, quite frankly. So very, very different. But what we found was the school was about 20 miles out, going towards the Don Mueang Airport, and it was a really tough commute for my kids going to the international school there.
How old were they?
So at this time, I had I guess my son Andrew was in middle school, so I'm guessing maybe probably 11 or 12. Then I have my son Brian, 8 or 9, and my daughter Molly, just probably 5 or 6.
So they still have memories from being there?
Oh yeah, most certainly they do. Yeah. So we go, we move out by the school. So now this means my commute is even longer now. But it was better for the kids because they could actually, they were like 1 mile away from the school, and there really was no traffic out there by the school. So that kind of worked out better for them, but it just made my days all the longer there, But it was a good assignment. We had very good relationships with the Thai authorities. We had a really good workforce there in Thailand, pretty big. I think I had in the office there, we had 25 or 30 just in our office there in Thailand, and then you had all those other countries and the different time zones, and basically when you're a regional director, it was they call them regional coordinators, and then it evolved into regional directors. But the coordinator was really, if you had a problem that you didn't really want to get a hold of headquarters on, that you could resolve more locally or more regionally, that was the key to that, because your time is just the opposite of what it is in the U.S. So 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the U.S. is 3 o'clock in the morning in many places of Thailand. So it's like, well, So if you have something going on at 3 in the afternoon in Thailand or Korea, it's easier to try to resolve it there regionally than it is to try to get somebody. You have to wait till the next day, if you get a hold of headquarters. So the time zone difference did make a difference, and so it was kind of a smart move in many ways for DEA. But what it did was it cut out the direct reporting to headquarters. So I know when I was in Seoul, it was interesting. I got more done, like by faxing things from the job or even from my house at night to headquarters, and then by the time I woke up, I'd have my problems resolved. Right. So it was really, that was back before you had all the internet connections and all the different internet traffic that we have now. But so it was just different. It's different to be overseas, but I would say that the exposure and the cultures and the exposure that my kids had was really good across the board for all the different places that we went.
What was your favorite place for food?
That's a good question. I love Korean food. I love Thai food. I love all kinds of Asian food. I love Mexican food. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know if I really have a favorite. I think probably this afternoon we're going to go get Korean. Haven't had Korean in a while, so. But I do like spicy Asian food, and I like all kinds of spicy foods.
And so. you have enough of that going on in Loudoun County now.
We don't have enough Korean restaurants. We have one Korean restaurant in Loudoun County. It's called Somak, and it's down there, and it's about 20 miles from my house, which is not close enough. So.
No, that's not close. No.
So we go there, but we need to get more Korean restaurants. We got a good Thai restaurant in town. We got some pretty good Mexican restaurants. We got some pretty nice restaurants as well.
So how many years have you been in law enforcement at this point, and when you're in Bangkok?
Okay, so I'm in Bangkok. I mean, you're probably talking about at this point 30 plus years or so.
And you're still not retiring?
Still not retiring. So we come back. So I have to do a domestic assignment if I want to look at a promotion, because at that point you couldn't. The rules were that you couldn't get promoted to a senior executive unless you came back and you did domestic field time.
But you already had that, didn't you?
Not as a GS-15.
Not at that.
So I came back. I was like, okay, so I'll come back and do my time. And at that point, we got assigned to California. And I guess in theory, it was, that was looked at as like, well, you got a big Asian population. You got, you're on the West Coast. You're connected to, you're closer to Japan and all the Far East places. But so I went there. We went to San Francisco, and I covered all operations for the Northern District of California there. So I was the operational ASAC, and found actually that most of the methamphetamine that was coming in was actually coming in out of Mexico anyway. So it really wasn't coming in from the Far East.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. So is the rationale behind that domestic experience as a GS-15 is the idea that as you grow in leadership, you need to have more of an understanding of the different regions and what they are.
No, I would say a lot of that was dependent on who the administrator was at the time and what they preferred at the time and how they wanted to justify. Senior executive positions are really by appointment, and so you don't really need. You can change the roles however you want, and so. But at that particular time, that was one of the things that they decided that they wanted was that you had to have field time as a domestic field time. Even though what I found, having been a domestic ASAC and having been a foreign country attaché and a GS-15 overseas, was that. That the complexity of the job that I had overseas far greater, and not only that, but you had not only the different cultures and the different reporting, but everything that you reported on, you had to report two ways. You had to report by way of a report, which I would review all the reports that went into the files, or by way of a cable, so that everybody could in headquarters could know. So you ended up having to do it as like a teletype. So you actually had to do twice as much work just to report what you were doing in these various places, So. But
are you also reporting to local authorities?
No, we don't report back to them. We report basically to the headquarters as to what's going on, or to our desk. In other words, if you're in foreign ops, you got a foreign ops desk. So they would get the reports as well as the reports that went into the file locally, so that in your case file, so you could work your cases from there. So we went out to California, and I had the Northern District. So we covered. There was a lot of at the time, a lot of marijuana indoor grows. These people were stealing electricity, doing all these. It's interesting when I look at. For the folks when I was in high school that smoked marijuana there, they were probably getting, I don't know, maybe THC of maybe 6%, 4 to 6% or something like that. These indoor grows, I was astounded as to when you go to these indoor grows and you see how scientifically they would do this lighting, and they would grow this stuff, and the buds would how they made the sensimilla, and how they could tease the buds in order to really get the THC potency up and all this other kind of stuff. And what was going on in California a lot was they would rent homes. Okay, so you rent a home from somebody, and then you set up an indoor grow, and then you start stealing electricity from your neighbors there. You just pipe into the electrical wires. You're stealing all this electricity, and then you're growing all this stuff inside, and then all the mold that gets in there ruins a house. It completely destroy a house. So if you were renting a house there to somebody, you better check on it, because if they decided to do an indoor grow, you could forget it.
What area? So first, what was the geographic region that you covered from where to where?
So I had everything from San Jose south to the Oregon border north, and east to probably about Stockton or so.
Got it.
So it's pretty big. It's a pretty good size area.
And the people who are renting these houses, is that happening in suburban neighborhoods or rural neighborhoods? Just
mostly. We found a couple of them. I went to like Oakland. Okay, so they were like the older neighborhoods in Oakland. These homes. So you had that problem. You had and then they of course legalized marijuana to some degree out there in California. They were the first off the mark. I think Colorado followed. I would say that California really had no real good plan for that. Colorado at least had a structured plan to do it, but it's still a mess with all the marijuana stuff. And I could go on for days on why I think that legalization of marijuana is a huge mistake, and the stuff with the doctor's note and
that would trend with every law enforcement officer we've interviewed.
Now, well, the thing is that people are like, oh, you get a doctor's note and marijuana is not any worse than alcohol. So, well, there's no regulations on it. Okay, so even if you try to regulate it statewide, it's not going to stop somebody from selling it illegally to you, and there's no way to. Like people, like for alcohol, for example, you still got to meet certain requirements. It's got to be tested. It's got to be regulated. Prescription drugs got to be regulated. Marijuana, there's nothing. So you can have marijuana, you can have fentanyl on it, you can have marijuana that's got PCP on it. You can have all kinds of things, and there's really no way to tell. So it's so dangerous. People just have no idea how dangerous that stuff is. They don't know what they're putting into their body. They may think they do, but they really don't. And the consequences of that could be drastic.
Is Humboldt in your jurisdiction?
It was, yeah. And I went up there. We went up there. We flew up there and did some helicopter rides up there and landed, and I looked at some of the plants. I had plants that were twice as tall as me, marijuana plants, and they would grow them on state lands, and and they would put all these chemicals on. These chemicals would run downstream, go into the water. So the people in California were more upset about the chemicals that were used to fertilize marijuana than they were the marijuana itself. And then they would bring up migrants to work the fields, and it was just it's really a corrupt enterprise. It doesn't do anybody any good. Stuff doesn't do anybody good.
I remember there was a documentary, and I don't remember the name, but it was about the people who go missing in that area. Who come from all across the world to work in that that field,
right.
And it just is one of those things that seem a lot more nefarious than people realize.
It is. It is. And then, of course, in California, you also had methamphetamine coming up from a lot from the southwest border coming up there, and you kind of had a mix of everything. You had some heroin, you had some methamphetamine, cocaine. You had like everything there. What I found in Northern California was it wasn't the high volume that you usually. I guess it would get watered down by the time it got there, or dispersed better. but not the same kind of volume you get in places like LA or San Diego or whatever, the closest places closer to the border where you get bigger seizures, but it was still a lot of activity going on up there.
Yeah. What was one of the more dangerous places that you worked?
I would say of all the places that I worked, so it really goes back to when you become a manager. When you become a supervisor, when you become a manager, and supervisors, we would go out on the road as a supervisor. But as you go up the ranks, you do that less and less because you got a lot more administrative responsibilities. And I would say that that Miami, as a special agent on the street, was probably dangerous. I also do remember being in McAllen as a supervisor, going out on the street and taking down people.
Texas.
Texas. Yeah. So I would say that, but I would say probably the most dangerous place would have been Miami, because back then, in the mid '80s. Unlike now, where the fentanyl is killing people, the killing the users. Back then, it was all for market share. So all the guys that were selling the cocaine and trafficking the cocaine and producing the cocaine and transporting the cocaine, they were all in competition with each other. So they were fighting each other like crazy. And so it was almost like you just didn't want to get caught in the middle of all that gunfire.
Right.
But it was a very, very dangerous place to be at the time. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So we are in California, in law enforcement for over 30 years now.
Right.
So the idea was that you would then do a domestic tour in order to achieve the next step within the DEA. Is that what happened, or did you?
Well, no. What happened was, as I was there, I got a pretty good offer. Okay, so the way the retirement in the federal government works is that you have a 20-year system. You got to do 20 years by the time, and you can only go to you're 57 years old. And I think the multiplier, it's really pretty weak. It's a 1.35 multiplier, although they do contribute to your thrift savings significantly. So most of the money you're going to get in retirement is going to be what the matching contributions that you get on your 401k. So this comes down to a matter of dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. So I'm out there, and then after you do 20 years, your multiplier goes down to like 1%. So there's a disincentive to stay on the job after you've done 20 years.
Interesting.
It's a disincentive.
Wow.
And so what happens is, so I'm looking, and I'm like, well, do I wait? Do I wait for the next promotion? Or do we say, hey, look, I got a good job offer. Maybe it's time to, jump ship and, take the offer. And I went to a financial advisor, and I mean, the financial advisors I went to recommend that I take the pension and take a second job, even one who was like losing his shirt, because at the time it was in 2008 is when the housing market crashed.
Right.
So for me, I was fortunate because the actual move to California worked out in my favor, because I still had a house in Stafford, and so the government, when they move you like that, they do a buyout on your house. And so what was happening was the market started to tank, and so I went ahead and sold the house and put the money in the bank. So I actually had a little bit of money in the bank from the house sale, and we just rented out in California. We weren't sure if we were going to stay in California. Wasn't our what we were used to, so we decided to rent instead, which was like kind of by luck was like the best financial move I probably ever made in my life, because the money, we sold the house that we had in Stafford, put the money in the bank, sat on it, and then when I got the job offer from Booz Allen, I was able to come back to the East Coast. I was able to take that money and put that money down into a house out where I live out in Leesburg. So it actually worked out pretty well.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Booz Allen then came knocking at the door. What year was that?
That would have been in 2008. Okay, so I remember you had to go in for a couple interviews, and with Booz Allen, so I knew some people there. I had a lady that a very nice lady I worked with DEA that was working at Booz Allen, and so she set up an interview. So I go in the first time for an interview, and usually what they'll do, they're like strict half-hour interviews, and you interview with like 6 people. Okay, so I think a couple people were out. I interviewed with about 4 people. So then you got to come back for a second set interview. So I was visiting my mom with some of my kids in Indiana, Florida at the time, And I remember getting a call to come back, and I had my interview scheduled to go back up to D.C. or to Virginia, up here in Northern Virginia, Herndon, Virginia, with Booz Allen, and I was out at the beach with my kids, and I was body surfing, and I ended up catching this wave and slamming right down on my face, and I broke my nose in 2 places.
Oh my gosh!
So I looked like I had just gotten in a bar fight, you know. And I remember calling this gal with DEA. Her name was Joan, and I said, "Hey, Joan," I said, "I don't know if I should come up, man. They're look at me like, what is this guy? He looks like he got in a bar fight. I got 6 interviews to do. I'm gonna look like." So she said, "No, come up, you know." And I said, "Okay." And I remember taking a flight back up from Florida to finish my second series of interviews. And I had to go in and apologize. I'm like, "Hey, I'm sorry." I said, it looks like I got in a bar fight here, but I'm telling you, I was actually body surfing, and I broke my nose in 2 places. But anyway, so I go there and do my second series of interviews, and then about a month or 2 goes by, and then I get a call. "Hey, you know, we're offering you a job." So, and they wanted me as a subject matter expert in law enforcement to basically to kind of expand the market into the law enforcement community. They were already doing work. I think they had pretty good contracts, different contracts, FBI, whatever, DOJ, but they had not expanded much into DEA, and they also needed people that kind of understood law enforcement that could help write these proposals and provide some insight to them, you know. And I remember doing a proposal for like the first proposal that I did, and I always thought I was a halfway decent writer, and I did this thing. I did like about 50 pages in a week. Okay, so I write this proposal, and I just remember I actually, and it's hard to describe, but working at Booz Allen is sort of a flat environment. Okay, so when you go into a room, and what I really learned about this, and it's a lesson that I took from this, a leadership lesson, is that you go into a room of, say, maybe 12 people. There's a round table there. Everybody's in suits. So you don't know who ranks where, what the level of background, what the expertise is. And because it's a flat organization, the leaders of the proposals were all driven by either that group that specialized in that, or it wasn't like the command and control structure that you have either in the military or that you have in a paramilitary environment like law enforcement, or even in DEA, where you definitely have like a chain of command. Okay, this is a little bit different. And I remember I worked for a couple different bosses. One was a senior executive that had retired from the FBI. This one gal I worked, her name was Angela. She was about 35 years old, and it's kind of tough when you're 50. I think I was 51. And all of a sudden you got a boss that's, like the same age as your kids, so it's really kind of interesting, But I remember I did this proposal. It was an ATF proposal that we did for ATF. And what I always found in the federal government, if you had initiative, you pretty much could write what you wanted because nobody else was going to do it. It's not like it was much of a team effort in like if you had an initiative, because it was such a bureaucratically run organization. So what I found was working with Booz, it was a very collaborative environment, and you would sit around a table, and there was a whiteboard up there, and you'd have somebody that would just start charting down ideas, and really you didn't really know who was in the room, and all of a sudden the best ideas start rising to the top. These are going to be our win themes. This is how we're going to win this proposal. This is what we're going to do that the other guys are not going to do. And so it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter how many years you had on the job. It didn't matter if you were a boss or if you were a subordinate to somebody, you didn't want to say something to outshine your boss. It was like the best ideas won the day. And I really found it interesting. So anyway, so we get to this, and you have all these different teams. So you start out with like a, I don't know, it's like a gold team, which is a review. Then it's a blue team, which then, okay, we're going to take it. Then it's like a green team, it's a go. Then it's like a red team, and we write it. So it was all these different teams, and every step of the way, these proposals are getting chopped down, kind of reworded, taking this out, adding that in, this graphic, that graphic, and so you write all these things. I remember doing my first proposal there. I'd been there for less than a month, and I write this proposal. And I'm talking to Angela, and I look at the final version of the proposal, and I'd written the bulk of this proposal. And she says, "Hey, you did a great job. We're getting ready to submit it today." And I looked at it and I said, "I think there's about like one sentence left in these 50 pages that I actually wrote." And she says, "Oh, no, but you organize it, you pull it together. You know, that's not true. There's a lot that you wrote that's in there." I said, "I don't know, Angela. I don't know. I don't really see much of what I wrote in there." I said, I said, "I feel bad." I said, "Because that's like the best I can do." And she says, "Mike, it's not about the best you can do. It's about the best we can do. It's about the best Booz Allen can do." So it was a team effort. And what I found is certainly, as we advance forward into my management style or leadership style with the sheriff's office, how important that lesson was that I learned from somebody that's the age of my kids, how important it was to let the best ideas come to the top, to not feel like you got to take exclusive ownership of anything, but that you can have a collaborative environment, and let's make this the project or the product of everybody, so it's the best that we can do as a team, not just the best that Mike Chapman can do or somebody else can do. It's the best that we can do as a team.
So what was the proposal, or what does Booz Allen propose when it comes to working with different law enforcement agencies?
It depends on what the organization is looking for. Like in this particular case, it was ATF, and they wanted to have like this interim instruction on I forget what it was. It was some law enforcement instruction. I don't remember if it was safety, if it was investigations, or whatever the case was, and it was complicated because you had to do it on ATF's schedule when they could get people in, when they couldn't, and you had to, and there were people that are off. There were people that could come in for a certain amount of time and couldn't. So I had to do this very chaotic sort of timeline as to when we could supply instructors and when we couldn't, and then you got to figure out what instructors you're going to supply, how you're going to do it, and then you're going to bring somebody in for a week and then they don't teach for another 3 months, or how do you do all this, So it was really kind of complex. And that's when I think when the federal government's looking for these things, at least from a strategic standpoint, I can't talk about like General Dynamics or Raytheon or these folks or these people like that produce airplanes or helicopters or whatever. I can't talk about those kind of products. Booz Allen was mostly strategy. It was business strategy, organizational strategy, and how you take a problem, how you dissect it, how you figure out the best way to solve it, and then how you put it into action. So it was kind of that. It was a lot of strategy, So it was really good. I mean, from an organizational standpoint, it's really pretty good. So that was just an example, but it was like whatever organization would come in and they would say, "Look, hey, we're looking to restructure this unit or that unit, whatever the case is. And we want to pay somebody to do that. How would you do that?" And then because you have like sometimes it's a request for information that'll go out. And sometimes it's a request for proposal. If they kind of know what they want, they'll do a request for proposal. If they don't know what they want and they're kind of fishing, they'll do a request for information. So then you go ahead and you do all this work to tell them how you would do it. And then they kind of look and see like, okay, now we have an idea how we're going to do it. Now we're going to put it back out. So you give them the ideas that then they send back out to bid on, So it can get you can kind of get a little bit used that way, but because you're kind of doing all their work for them. But if you land the contracts, you're good for. I mean, you land these federal government contracts. I mean, you're good for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How was the transition then for you? Personally, for your family, you guys are, totally finished with the DEA at that point, and in
it was.
different
I would
world.
say that, my wife. I think she was very happy when I got the job. She what a trooper to put up with all this stuff all these years.
Absolutely.
And she's like thinking, okay, good. So Mike will have this job for the next 20 years. He's going to be writing proposals. He's going to be now. The problem for me working at Booz Allen was I wasn't like I'm still not very good on computers and graphics and spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. And all these people that were obviously much younger. And it's called one of the guys who I worked in the chain. If there was a chain of command out there, one of the vice presidents, a guy named Chris Kelly. This guy's like one of the smartest men I've ever come across. I mean, and one of the things I learned about him, which really kind of translated a lot for when I ran for office, was in what I found in the federal government was that you write. We wrote a lot. I wrote a lot of memos, a lot of proposals, a lot of inspections, a lot of this and that, and then you would take like a chart to kind of break down a little bit about what it really meant, what your narrative meant, and talking to him. he flipped that on its head. He was like, "Hey, your graphics should tell you everything. You should have very little, almost nothing in your narrative, your graphics. You need to really, be able to just shock people quickly or get their attention quickly with a graphic where they can look at it immediately and look at it and say, well, wow, okay, I understand that now. Where the words are only kind of to augment that as opposed to the other way around. Yeah. So I learned a lot about marketing from my short time with 3 years at Booz Allen. So, but I think my wife thought, okay, this is going to be great. So kind of interesting at the time that I was working there, I was there for about a year and a half, and the Carlisle group came in. Now, Governor Youngkin was one of the leaders of the Carlisle group, and at the time, they were revamping Booz Allen, which I never really kind of understood. I'm like, you got a strategic organization that does this for everybody else, and then they call in somebody from the outside to redesign Booz Allen, And so what they wanted to do, and I think they kind of did that really to basically to get the shareholders' money up, to cut the expenses, to probably trim. They call it greening your outfit, where you get rid of people and then you bring up the younger, less expensive people that are coming straight out of school and all this other kind of stuff. So it was really kind of interesting, and then you do a lot more offsite stuff. So if you look at if you were going towards Dulles Airport, and there used to be a Booz Allen building right there at right where it's in Herndon at 657, just before you get to the airport. Now it's Amazon, so it's got the AWS with the whatever smiley face. Yep. They used to be the Booz Allen building that I went to. So I remember. Not to jump too far ahead, but I remember when Governor Youngkin was running for office and we met, and and he was really looking to try to get my endorsement, and I wasn't ready to. I mean, we just met, but I remember talking to him when I said, "Hey, look," I said, we were talking about Booz Allen. I said, "Yeah, you guys came in and revamped Booz Allen," and I said, it's a good thing I became sheriff because I've probably been out of a job. Right. Because no, and I said, I probably would have the way it would have been restructured. I probably would have been out of a job, but no, I don't really know. All I know, I was just joking around with him. I mean, he's such a nice guy, but it was a different environment, but I learned a lot from the short time I was there because of just the way that they strategized on things. And to this very day, every morning at my office with my executive staff, I have a standing 8:30 meeting. Okay, and and it usually lasts about an hour and a half. Where most people, if you look at most companies that are led by executives, they might meet maybe once a week, once a month, once every 3 months, whatever. We do it every single day because we don't want anything to slip through the cracks. I mean, we work hard to make sure, wait a minute, because things are happening all the time in the public safety community. And if we're not on top of it, or you wait a week, it's too late. You got to know day to day what's going on. But I just, that collaborative work environment concept, and we used to do that kind of DEA, have standing 8:30 meetings. I don't think they do it anymore at headquarters, but I learned a lot from that and making sure that we weren't missing anything.
Wow. I wonder if my team would appreciate me calling a meeting every day at 8:30.
Well, I tell you what, I did it for a couple of reasons after I became sheriff. One was because it holds me accountable. Okay, so once you're elected, quite frankly, you get paid, every couple of weeks for the 4 years. You don't have any schedule. You work when you want. You don't work when you don't want. There's really, I don't do a timesheet. I don't do anything like that. I answer to the public, and if they don't like what I'm doing or they think I'm lazy or not doing my job, they're the ones that'll fire me, not a boss. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say like, hey, you're not doing your job. So it actually forces me every morning to go to work. I mean, I don't have to. I could not go to work for 4 years, but I go every single morning to make sure that I'm there and that we get this meeting done. So it holds me accountable, but it holds everybody else accountable too, because they know every single morning. Now, I would have thought that people wouldn't like that, and there's times like right now, it's a holiday season, so we suspended the meetings for like this week. We suspended them for this week and up until January 1st, just so people, because a lot of people on vacation and stuff like that, and we'll kick it back up as soon as January kicks off. But I found that people miss them. It's kind of funny because they're happy to get a day or two off, but when you're not doing it for a while, they're like, hey, when are we going to start those meetings up again? You know, so it's just good. It's a good way to start the day. I think it's a good way because we sit there, we talk about things, we joke around. It's a good way to ease into the day because you never know what the day is going to bring.
Yeah, and I think I imagine one of the challenges with that is keeping your schedule clear for that time of day every day. Mm-hmm. Is that a challenge?
Well, for me, at the level that I'm at, not usually, although sometimes we'll have something that's, a catastrophic event that we got to go to, or I got to go give a presentation someplace or speech, and I try to do their graduations as much as I can. I like to talk to the parents of the kids out there when they're graduating. So sometimes I won't make them because of those, or if I got to come down, to the Capitol Hill and meet with somebody or whatever the case is.
So you're flexible.
I'm flexible, but I try to make almost as many as I can, and I'd say I probably make about probably 65 to 70% of them.
So tell us a little bit about how the idea of becoming a sheriff.
So when I was working at Booz Allen, the day that I started working there, another guy from DEA came to Booz Allen as well. His name is Pete. And so Pete, we didn't actually know each other. We never worked together at DEA, but we knew of each other's backgrounds and reputations. So I'm talking to Pete, and we're getting our indoctrination day, and we end up working sort of in the same area. And Pete knew I was in the process. My family was still in California. I was staying with my in-laws in Rockville, Maryland, waiting for my kids to graduate school in California, so we could get going on with Booz Allen, and I could start looking for a home. So Ann had done the research, and she actually liked the idea of Loudoun County. We lived in Stafford County, and we liked Stafford County, but the I-95 corridor was just a disaster. So she didn't really want to stay there. She wanted to go back there. So she wanted to.
It still is.
Yeah, it still is. It's even worse now. So we looked at, plus we knew the building was going to be in Herndon, so it kind of made sense to go to Loudoun County. So she was back there, and I'm looking for homes on the weekends. I'm working all week. I'm looking for homes on the weekends. And while I'm doing it, Pete Montesser, a friend of mine, he says, hey, Mike, he goes, if you're going to be moving to Loudoun County, you ought to think about running for sheriff. And I said, why would I do that? And he says, they don't have a county police department. And I said, really? What does that mean? He goes, no, because the sheriff runs everything. Okay, so you have the jails and the courts, but in civil process. He goes, but the sheriff handles all enforcement. And I said, you mean investigations and, patrol and crime scene and all? He goes, they got everything. I said, really? I said, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. How common is that?
It's very uncommon. Well, we're the largest full-service sheriff's office in all of Virginia, so we're part of major county sheriffs. It depends on where you go. We're the 50th or around the 50th largest sheriff's office in the country. Okay, so you have ones that are much larger. For example, Los Angeles County would be the biggest. Okay, it's pretty common.
But they don't have a full service.
Yeah,
though. They do.
Los Angeles does.
Oh, okay.
But you would have like LAPD within Los Angeles. So we have. In Loudoun County, we have the Leesburg PD within Loudoun County.
Got it.
So generally, if you go across the U.S., the sheriffs have pretty much the rural areas, and then you have town or city police departments.
Right.
I thought growing up in this area that it was just normal, common practice to have county police departments. It's not. You go throughout the U.S., it's very rare to have county. I mean, some places have them, but it's very rare to have county police departments. Usually police departments are municipal. They're towns or cities and that sort of thing.
I wonder why that's a thing here.
I don't know.
Because, when I go, and people ask you where you're from, like I always say PG County. Mm-hmm. People don't identify by county as to where they're from, or Montgomery County or Fairfax.
Right.
It's such a very kind of unique thing to this area.
Yeah, it is. So for us, and so a sheriff's office, you can be in charge of just one. You might just have the courts. In Maryland, for example, say Montgomery County, you have the Department of Corrections that handles the jails. You have the police officers. The county police department handles all enforcement. So all you really have is the courts. And that's what they handle. So like Howard County, the sheriffs there would handle just courts and prisoner transport.
I wonder why would that be still an elected position?
It just is a traditional elected position since, when you go back to the days of the Shirees and you go back to the 1700s and, sheriffs were just always, basically, I know it started out in Loudoun County. Sheriff was kind of a tax collector, so I'm glad I'm not doing that.
Right.
Right. But you go back and you look at these things, so it's all kind of different depending on the style of government, depending on the state that you're in, depending on just a lot of factors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So here, it's really unusual here, and I'll probably get into this in a little bit. There was a move, as you probably saw in the media, for elected officials to take over and make a police department because of the amount of power and control that sheriffs have because they're elected. I mean, you have a lot of latitude. So I wasn't thinking about that. I kind of thought. I was so used to county police departments, and I thought maybe, if I decided to run for sheriff, maybe I would kind of go down that one and say maybe that's what I campaign on. And I did my research, and I found that so Pete had mentioned it to me, and I started looking into it. I didn't give it much thought at first, and I started thinking let me look into this a little bit, And there were a couple of people at Booz that had actually run campaigns, not for sheriffs, but had run political campaigns and stuff like that. And usually what I found when you're running for office, you get a lot of advice. Everybody wants to give you advice on something, and the vast majority of it is really pretty bad. But at Booz Allen, just to the contrary, there's a lot of smart people there.
Right.
And I'd be like,
you're in the right place.
Yeah, I was like, hey, this makes sense. Yeah, hey, I could do this. Hey, I could do that, So I look into it and decide, hey, wait a minute, this might actually be doable. And then I looked into the fact that there had been a study done, and there's always moves by local officials to try to make police departments because they don't like the autonomy that a sheriff has. We answer directly to the people. They love it. There are people that want a police department because, they want others to control. They want political agendas to control a police chief, which is what you're seeing a lot of, probably more in the last couple of years than you've ever seen in this country. Which gives me, a lot of the autonomy that I have. I think is very appreciated in the law enforcement community in Northern Virginia and certainly D.C. region. And we're getting a lot of people that have left police departments to come to work for us because of that. They don't like. People will say, "Oh, it's elected, so it's more politics involved." It's actually less politics involved because I'm directly held accountable. People don't like what I'm doing, but believe me, I hear it. Even when we're doing great things, I mean, like, "Oh, why'd you do that?" And I get it every single day. All you got to do is look at any newspaper article that comes up, and you'll have, I would say, we're probably 80%, 90% of the people are very much in favor of what we do, and you're always going to have somebody take a swipe at me or the agency or whatever the case is. So it's kind of interesting. So I looked at that and I was like, I looked at the studies on it, and they've never succeeded in doing that in the past, even though the attempts were not as serious as this last one was. They never succeeded in accomplishing that. And it's because I think people like having a voice. If you have a voice in directing, in directly selecting your top law enforcement official, why would you give that up to somebody else?
Sure. Yeah.
And in fact, even when they were looking at replacing the chief in Baltimore some years ago, people are like, "Yeah, we need a new chief," and then they're like, "Well, can't we have a voice in this?" They're like, "No, you appoint you elect a mayor, the mayor selects a chief. That's just the way it works, So, I look into it, and I start doing my like a detailed investigation into this as to like whether or not this is even possible. Okay, so I'm living in the county for just probably about a year. I start looking into it, and I start talking to people in the party, trying to figure out, is this doable? What would it take? How much money does it take? Who do I have to know? Who do I have to get to work with and all that? So I do my research on this, and I remember meeting with a gal, really nice gal who was like the authority on what it takes to get elected in Loudoun County. And I remember I'd done my research. Is the existing sheriff beatable? And I thought, yeah, because other than the first time that he ran, he got elected in '96. Other than that first time where he would have got 51% of the vote, I guess, against the incumbent, he never pulled more than about 37% of the vote. He got elected mostly because of a plurality. So you'd have 5 or 6 people. It's like everybody wants to be sheriff, okay? So you'd have like 5 or 6 people in the race. and he pulled about 37% and win because nobody else could get more than about 10, 11%, you know. So I'm like, wait a minute, he can't be that popular of a sheriff if he's not even pulling 50% of the vote here, you know. So I'm like, okay, so maybe he is. I could take him on, you know. And so I look at what it's going to take. I'm talking to this gal, she says, and I talked to her for about 2 hours. And she says, look, you got a great background. She goes, let me ask something. She goes, how long you lived in the area for? And I said, a year. She says, who do you know? And I said, nobody. She says, how much money you got? I said, none. She goes, I don't think I'd be running if I were you. So I decide that I'm going to do it anyway. I talk with Ann. She didn't want me to. Her daddy just passed away from lung cancer. Gave up smoking like 30 years before, but still got lung cancer and passed away. So it was a pretty rough time, and you know, she was not big on me doing this thing, but I decided, you know, I'm like, hey, look, I want to do it, you know. And I talked to even some people at Booz. There's a guy at Booz Allen and said, look, he goes, why don't you just stick around for 4 years, get known better, and then try it? I said, in 4 years, I may not want to do it. Now I want to do it. I want to try it, you know. I said, the worst I can do is lose, you know. And so Ann and I made had an agreement. We're like, well, look, we don't have any money, so you're not going to put whatever little that we have into this thing. So either, you know, if you can do it on your own with contributions. So I remember holding my first fundraiser, and I pulled down a little bit more than $1,000. I was like, wow, man, actually, it was interesting to me. The neighbor across the street wasn't going to be able to make it. So she sends her daughter over, is friends with my daughter, Molly, with a check for $125. And I was the first time I ever took money for like me being me, you know?
Right, sure.
It was
no, different.
It was weird. It was extremely weird for me to get money and that people actually believed in me. And I was like, you know, I'm going to either do this thing, I'm going all out. Either I'm going to do it or I'm going to die trying.
Yeah, because already that neighbor's invested in you.
That's right.
And so even at $125.
That's right. It's an investment, and it's because they believe in you. You know, now I got people believing in me. I gotta do this thing. You know, so I decide, okay, we're in, and I told Ann, I said, look, as soon as we're out of money, I'm out. You know, so I get like $1,000, and I print some cards up, and fortunately, because of the I was able to really figure out some pretty good graphics that really painted some pretty strong pictures out there. Of me versus my opponents, kind of pretty quickly off the bat, that they started getting notice, and so, but I did some postcards and stuff like that. Then I'm out of money, so I guess I was like, okay, well, I guess we're out. You know, I get like another $500. I guess we're back in. You know, so this is kind of the way we piecemealed it throughout the first game.
Well, how long was that time period?
Well, I would say I announced in November. I had a fundraiser in November. January, February, you know, is probably when I put my piece out, my first mailer out, and then we were kind of out of money, and then I figured, okay, well, I guess I'm done, and then I get a little bit more people taking an interest, give me a little bit more money here and there, so I guess I'm back in, so it's kind of that way. I had all volunteers. I had everybody that was helping me was volunteering. You know, so I didn't have any salaries to pay. Figured, hey, look, we're going to give it everything we got, and that's that. You know, and hopefully we win this thing. And so, I mean, it was pretty chaotic. I mean, I would say that, you know, as I went through the year, I get there were two people. I ran in the Republican Party, and the Republican Party didn't really want me because I was new to the scene. I hadn't spent 20 years, you know, knocking on doors and dropping Republican literature, and I've never really been in politics, you know.
Right.
Like, that's not my thing.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't like that because they want you to be political, to be with the party. But they
was that historically how the previous sheriffs were? Were they aligned more with?
It would depend. It would depend on like the sheriff that I ran against, the existing sheriff that I beat was an independent. He had been a Republican. He didn't like the way he actually lost the nomination, the Republican nomination in a primary. So he ran as an independent and he won. So there was, you know, a little bit of love lost there with him. With the Republicans, although he still had a Republican, he had plenty of people in the Republican Party that would have voted for him, probably voted for him, you know. So it was just kind of, it was all very new to me, you know. So, but the Republicans, they knew I had federal credentials, so they grabbed. There was a guy who's FBI guy who's since passed away. that they brought in to run against me. Okay, he wasn't able to get really much traction. Then they brought in a local guy who was a cop in a neighboring department who had run for sheriff before, and they brought him in, and I was still gaining all the popularity within the party. And then there was a guy that was kind of on his own. He was a wild card, a guy named Ron, who passed away a couple years ago himself, and he had been a mortgage broker, subprime mortgage broker. I met with him. He tried to talk me out of the race, and he had been a cop in Leesburg for about 8 years, and I think he was about to get fired, so he quit. So we're talking, and I remember going to IHOP with him, and he says, he goes, I got money, and you don't have any money. I said, you're right, I don't have any money to run a race, And he goes, and he told me a lie as to how much money the sheriff's office paid. I said, no, it pays more than that. No. I said, okay. And then he goes, I got money, and I've got the experience. And I said, well, I'd say I got some experience here, He goes, yeah, but you can't win. And I said, well, we'll see, And he goes, yeah, but, he starts bragging on himself. I said, look, stop for a minute, Ron. I said, you're a subprime mortgage broker. And he goes, and that was right after all the mortgage stuff had gone south, and it was like the worst thing that you could be. Right. It was like a subprime mortgage broker, because that's kind of what killed a lot of that killed the global economy. So he goes, oh no, I do loans for everybody, I do all kinds of, I broker all kinds of mortgages. And I said, yeah, but you broker subprime mortgages, right? And he goes, well, yeah. And I said, that makes you a subprime mortgage broker. So he didn't particularly like that. So anyway, it was contentious, pretty contentious from the start. So we end up, but politics is very contentious. And you got to really, unfortunately, you got to really take the gloves off and go at it sometimes, So Ron ran, so the other two guys ultimately, they couldn't pick up steam, even though the party was basically, I think, guiding them to try to take me out, and I was still gaining the most steam in the party. And then this guy, Ron, ran against me, and he would not refuse to back out. He actually had the money to run a campaign. And I think he probably, even though he recorded about $150,000, I think he put a lot more into his campaign than was actually on the books. And I beat him. So then he decided to run. I won every district in the county in the primary, and so he decided to run independent, and then he lost. And then as did the existing sheriff, and so it was a three-way race, and I still pulled down in a three-way race. I think 52% of the vote against an incumbent sheriff, a 16-year incumbent sheriff, So,
and you'd only been there for a year.
Just over a year.
Right.
Yeah, about a year and a half at that point,
Yeah.
So it was kind of unheard of. In fact, I went to, one of the things I've always hated about running for office is the raising money, okay? It's very uncomfortable for me to ask people for money, so I don't. I mean, it's rare that I'll do that. I usually will do an event, like a golf event, or I did
sure.
And then I ask for sponsorships, or I did an event, Jazz It Up with the Sheriff, and I had people I work with that were on the Narcos series, Steve Murphy and Javier Pena come out to be guests and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I do that at a winery, and people come out. It was actually worked out pretty good. So people get something other than just.
Let me know next time you do that.
Yeah, okay.
I'll come out. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because all they because they get something for their money. They're getting a little entertainment, and you get a little people speaking, and you get a little video and stuff like that.
Right.
So at least they're getting something for it, or they come out, you play golf. I just don't like the idea of just calling people up and asking for very uncomfortable for me, So as I'm running the first time. Somebody sets up a fundraiser for me with some of the top donors in the county, and about only half of them showed up, and then nobody except for one person contributed. I only got $200, and it was the top donors. That was after I'd won the Republican nomination, because they didn't even think I could take out an incumbent sheriff. They didn't think I could defeat an incumbent sheriff, and I did pretty handily, and it's amazing what it takes, the amount of work and and people would see, it's interesting because I brought a couple guys on, because I kind of cleaned house, because if you're going to try to get your vision initiated, you got to kind of clean house at the top levels there, So I brought in a former senior executive from the FBI, a former senior executive from the DEA. And as I went on to my second campaign, I remember the FBI guy saying to me, he goes, "Hey, did you know that there's one of those big 4x8 Chapman sign up there on Loudoun County Parkway?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, you guys must have put that up this week." He goes, "Did you see it? How'd you know it was out there?" I said, "Because you're looking at my guys." I said, "I'm the guy that goes out there."
I did it.
I do it almost all myself. I do it
Wow.
almost all myself.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
I get the signs. I go out there. I'm banging these posts into the ground. I'm hanging these signs. I'm designing, my graphics, or working with people to design my graphics. I can't do things like websites and all that. I gotta have help with that. But the amount of citizen contact that it requires to keep your name and image, to get it out there. So think about this. I lived in the county for a year. The county at that point was probably about 350,000, 340,000 or so. I only lived there for a year, and I won a countywide election. Not dog catcher, not school board. I was working at Booz at the time I was running, and I remember my boss had given me permission to do it, but he didn't put anything in writing. And then I had to get. They brought in like a new chief counsel. This lady calls me up and she says, "Hey, Mike Chapman." I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Did I hear right? You're running for sheriff out there in Loudoun County?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right." She goes, "That's a pretty big job, right?" And I said, "Yeah, pretty big job." And she says, "Not like dog catcher or anything." I said, "No, it's a pretty big job." So she says, she goes, "Who gave you permission to do that?" And I told her my boss's name. She goes, "Do you have that in writing?" And I said, "Well, no." Now I'm about halfway through my campaign now. I'm thinking, "Oh my God, they're going to shut it down," But they didn't. They let me run, obviously, and I won. So it worked out.
Yeah. So I actually had a question about some of those people that didn't show up the first time around. Were they there the second time around?
Yeah, you've got to build credibility as you go.
Mm-hmm.
Quite interestingly, though, the second election was the toughest for me, because what happened was I kind of thought I had pretty much got rid of the old boy network that was there, but you're talking about a 30-year span of people that are in there. And what I found was that there were people in the senior ranks that didn't want that old boy network in, wanted their old boy network in.
For sure.
They wanted it back. Okay, but so I think I might have looked at to them as like an interim, catalyst to then come in, fail what I was doing, and then they could run and take over. And what amazed me the most was the treachery involved internally when it comes to the election process. It's treacherous. It's devious. It's mean. It's mean-spirited. And you would think that people want to run. Like for me, the reason I ran was I felt like, hey, I could do a good job. I could do a better job than the guy that's in there. I got better credentials. I think I've shown I've done a lot more than he's done as a sheriff, that I could do a better job, But the second time around, there were people that were really working hard. Working hard to take me out and really ruin my reputation.
Wow.
Just accusing me of things that were just absolutely outrageous. I'm coming to work drunk. I'm beating my wife. All kinds of stuff.
Wow.
It's crazy. I kind of look at, like politics, like, mixed martial arts fighting, okay, where there are no rules, but it's actually even worse, because even in MMA, you can't eye gouge, and you can't, hit somebody in their private parts there, But here there are no rules in politics. There are absolutely no rules in politics, and anything goes, and it doesn't matter what you make up. It doesn't matter. But I would say one of the things that really helped us along was my wife's sister. She passed away about 4 years ago. She was severely schizophrenic. She's probably one of the worst cases I've seen throughout my life. And she was in Montgomery County, and it was So sometimes she was handled very well by the police, and sometimes not well. It was very inconsistent the way law enforcement dealt with that. And my wife became a facilitator for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And when her dad died, she kind of had to take responsibility for her sister Alice and help out with that. And so she says, Mike, if you get elected, you have to make crisis intervention training a priority. And I said, we looked into it, and there was a Memphis model on this, and we looked into it and said, hey, look, this is something that we could do. I said, look, I'll make a commitment to try to get 25% of my people trained. And she's like, why that? And I said, why not 100%? I said, well, yeah, because you got to, it's a 40-hour course. You got to backfill spots. You got to pay overtime. There's a whole lot of, it's a management issue involved in this, not just a matter of training people, and when people working, 24, different schedules, night shift and all this other kind of stuff. So, but we had to do all this, what's called cross-systems mapping. So you have to get all these stakeholders in, and it took a long time. We got it going, though. We got one of the most active, we have probably the most active program in the region, and we've trained over 1,000 people in it now, had over 50 classes there in Loudoun County over the years, and probably one of the most successful programs in the nation. We've been nationally recognized for that. We've been nationally recognized for a school resource officer program. I got their Executive of the Year a few years back with the Drug Enforcement Administration. So we've done exceptionally well with some very proactive, good community outreach type programs. And I think those things we do because it's the right thing to do. I don't know that when I was, first elected as a Republican, that people on the conservative side saw much value to like crisis intervention training, just generally. It became very valuable to them as time went on, but at the time it's like, you're cops, you arrest people, that's what you do. Why are you going to go down this road, But we did very, very proactive things to stay in front of so many issues, which is why I think we have the success that we have today. So while you have these internal politics and people trying to take over an office because of because of power, it's interesting to me. It's just all about power and control. It has nothing to do with what's the right thing to do for the people. And I'm like, well, first of all, I've never considered myself a politician. I told you earlier, I get insulted when people call me a politician because every 4 years I got to do a political process. And I've got to also be very, very aware of what's going on out there with the citizens that we serve. And when I see, for example, a couple weeks ago, we had a lot of graffiti, a lot of hate graffiti that was there, and I thought it was important for me to go out, even though I was with groups that would not be considered conservative groups by any stretch of the imagination, to let people know, hey, look, we take this seriously. We're going to address it. We're going to do everything we can to find out who did this. Nobody likes hate. Okay, so I do a lot of things that are not necessarily politically geared one way or the other. It's just what I think is the right thing to do, and it bothers me that so many politicians now get in there, and it's just all about power. It's all about control. As I'd mentioned earlier, there was a solid move to try to get rid of the sheriff's office. There's been moves over time, but this was the most serious. And we had a chair of the board who really wanted to have a police department. And her argument was, and I get it to an extent, her argument was that, hey, wait a minute, you can have anybody that's 18 years old, that's a county resident, that has a high school diploma, run for sheriff. It's like, yeah, technically true. And they did have somebody that the Democrats put up last time that had no law enforcement background whatsoever. He was a reservist, Army captain, I think, in the military, but no law enforcement background, and he won the nomination over the Democrat nomination over a guy who did have a law enforcement background, a guy who had worked for me, who that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so her argument is like, well, anybody can run and win, and so how do you guarantee that somebody is qualified to do the job? It's like, well, how do we guarantee that you're qualified to do your job? What are your qualifications to be chairwoman of the board or any of the supervisors on there? What are your qualifications? We got one guy on the board who is a former Air Force graduate and a fighter pilot, and then you have other people that that don't have nearly any kind. There are no. It's who the people choose. It's how you make your case and whether they vote for you and who they choose. So you want to take them out because you think you know better than the same people that voted you in. Now you know better than they do as to who you should have as your chief. You know? So so I get it. I get it because you look around. Okay, so when I was in Korea, I started and I ultimately finished my master's degree. And I'm glad I did that, because now if you look at, it's almost a minimum. It's almost a minimum standard for any job now to have a master's. But you look in, for professional jobs. But you look at what's going on, and I understand. Okay, so you look at, if you look at Prince William County, the chief there's got a law degree. You look at everybody else got a master's degree. I got a master's degree. So it's become kind of like the expected or the normal process. But there's no guarantee. You could run and win and not have any of that, you know. Look at, without giving names, look at some of the people that got elected this last election, you know, and you're like, my goodness, So there are no requirements really, and so that was her argument. Okay, so they decide that they want to, so immediately after the last election, she announces that she's going to target the sheriff's office and make a police department. And she had a 6-3 majority in the Board of Supervisors. So she wanted to go after that and really felt she can do this, okay? And
what year was this? Was this recent?
Yeah, this was like this is within the past. So I got elected the first time, I got elected the second time. So this would have been right after my third election as sheriff. So she wanted to go right away and target me, and to try to make a police department to basically take control of law enforcement. So we had actually done our internal report, and did I thought it was a pretty solid report as to what it would take, how much it would cost, what little it would change. We all get trained at the same place, whether we're cops or deputies. We all get trained at Northern Virginia Training Academy, so the training's the same, the service is the same. We had, traditionally lowest crime rate in the area. We got the highest citizen satisfaction rating. So we did our own internal study, and we found, and we were very objective about it. We had like a 3-page bibliography on us, 99 pages or something like that. We had a 3-page bibliography on it. So it was a lot of work that was put into that. So she was working hard to get this on the agenda, and I find out from a reporter that this thing is going to go on to the last Board of Supervisors meeting on the last opportunity for them to get this on the board just before the November election in 2020. And so we're like, I'm like, man, this is horrible. But fortunately, we kind of figured it might be coming, so we had our report ready. And as soon as this came, we released our report. As soon as we heard that this was going to happen, and the public was all on our side. It was rare. We killed it, even though they had the votes to get this to a referendum. It takes a referendum, and then people got to vote whether they want to go down that road. Then it's got to be approved by the General Assembly, and then so it's really kind of a complicated process. But the first step is a referendum, and if you can get the public behind it, the rest of it just becomes kind of pro forma. So we had the public, and we had a lot of avenues to notify people. And they got mad at us. Everything we did was actually the way we do it. We did very factual reporting on this is what it would take. We didn't take a political side other than to say, like, that's going to cost this is what it would take, this is what it would mean to you and your service and all that. So we took it on, and they backed off. They backed off and put in a referendum that. And then they wanted to do a study, a more comprehensive study, because they didn't believe our study. So they hire ultimately the International Association of Chiefs of Police to do this study. Nobody's ever done a study like this before to actually make a sheriff's office into a police department. So IACP is as vast as their experience is. They've never done this before. But I felt like I was actually on the proposal review group as well as her, the chair and a county administrator, assistant county administrator. So we go through all this stuff. And it was pretty contentious, but we agree on ICP being the best qualified to do this study. So they do this study. $500,000 later, they find that we got the lowest crime rate, highest citizen satisfaction rating, internal approval ratings of close to 90%. And I'd say I take those numbers, especially internal numbers, and put that up against any organization. Any organization, not just law enforcement, but how many people in their jobs? How many organizations have 90% of the people that like going to work every day? Not too many, let alone police departments, And then what's even what I find is kind of ironic is for the last 2 years I'm like one of the few countywide standing elected officials. We have a commissioner of the revenue, we have a clerk of the circuit court, and a treasurer, but I actually have the highest profile of anybody. So I kind of like am the standard bearer for conservatives in the Loudoun County, and against a primarily Democrat board, and what's become more of a Democrat county. And I got Loudoun Now, which is the local paper. For the last 2 years, I got favorite public servant, and then for Loudoun Times Mirror, I got best public servant this year. So it's really kind of, I find it ironic that as much as they try to throw at us, fact of the matter is people like the service that they're getting, and for me to get those awards was, it's not a big deal. It's just a local paper, but that's, people vote in on that, So so it was really kind of neat.
So you are about to enter. You have entered into your 4th race.
Yeah, I'll be running again. I haven't made an official announcement yet, but by the time this airs, I'm sure it'll be official. It's going to be coming out soon, but we'll.
It's airing tomorrow.
Oh, it is.
I'm just kidding. No.
Oh, okay. well, it'll be out. It'll be out very, very shortly.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to go, and I've always had opponents in every single race. I mean, I've had 2 primaries, I've had 3 elections, so I've actually won this office 5 times.
Right.
So it's like we know the great thing is that we have an incredibly talented group of people that work in that department, and people that are really committed, and they're held accountable, and there's an expectation that they get out and they engage with the public. I just interviewed. We've had now I think 7 Metro DC police officers that have come on a job. We've had over a dozen that came over from Prince William County. We've had people that came over.
I was going to ask what your staffing levels are at.
Well, we're a little bit short-staffed right now, more than we've been lately, but we have had a lot of retirements. But we're getting a lot of people that are coming over from other departments. However, now that everybody's paying these big bonuses, we're having a little bit more difficulty there, because it's hard for me to get that kind of money, or to get any money from the county when it comes to that from for sheriff's office. It's easier for these town or city councils to get that money from their councils for police departments, and for me as a sheriff's office. But we're still getting a lot of people. And what's interesting to me is we do so much. We have such a variety of assignments in the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. But I interview everybody that comes through that job. Just about. It's rare that I won't interview somebody coming on a job, and I don't know of any chief or sheriff with an organization this size that takes the time to do that. I'm involved, in addition to us doing an assessment center, I'm involved in every promotional interview, because I think, you can do these cookie cutter assessment centers, and they're good, to get like basic skill sets on people, but you don't really get to know people when you do that. You don't know if they got special skills, they have a special language, they have a special certification, like a dive team certification.
Right.
Are they, what else do they bring to the table that wouldn't show up in that, that might be important to a particular position, So we look at everything, but most everybody that I talk to that comes on this job loves the community policing aspect, that we look at everybody in our agency is expected to be professional, treat people with dignity and respect, and to just be just very polite out there. And I would say I get every online citizen complaint and compliment that comes in, and we still average about 4 compliments to every complaint. Complaints are usually pretty minor,
It's a good ratio.
Yeah. And I would say most every compliment that we get has to do with the professionalism of our deputies out there. And I think the difference, quite frankly, is the fact that I'm elected. There's the expectation that the public knows you, they feel comfortable with you, they They like what you do, and our deputies, I think, really feel that. When people come in that door and they say, the reason I applied to this job is because of your community policing, I would say that's the majority of people come in. I mean, from other agencies, because you're not running from call to call. You're not just pulling people over and giving them tickets. You're not just doing enforcement. You're doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, we're doing coffee with a cop. We got Child Safety Day. We're doing quarterly meetings. We're out there. We're like in every, and I think a lot of that has to do with just a constant, regular outreach that we do to the citizens that we serve, so they know that we're actually there for them. So it actually works out well. So we're doing pretty good. Our numbers are down a little bit, but they're starting to pick back up. And what's interesting to me is we're getting so many people from other agencies, which tells us that you would have never seen that years ago, where people, if you couldn't get hired as a cop, you might go to a sheriff's office, get a little experience, and then go back out. Now it's working the other way around. People are coming, we're looked at as in this area as a very professional organization.
Yeah, good. Well, kudos to you.
It's a great team. We got a wonderful team, and we got a lot of dedicated people. So it's really, the credit goes to them.
Yeah. Well, this whole conversation has been amazing, and as our listeners go and go to open this episode, and they're going to see that it's clocking in at 3 hours. They're going to wonder to themselves, what is going on in this conversation for 3 hours? But it has been very exciting, and I really appreciate all the time that you've taken to share all the aspects of your career, which has just been phenomenal. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Before we go, you have any favorite quote that you love, or any words of wisdom that you want to share from Sheriff
Well, I
Chapman?
would say it's interesting that you asked that, because the favorite quote I have is really a Teddy Roosevelt quote, and it's called "The Man in the Arena." It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how a strong man stumbles or doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man in the arena whose face is marred with blood and sweat, who fights valiantly but errs time and time again. For there is no effort without There is no effort without something like exhaustion. And if you who knows the triumphs and devotions of success, and if he fails while daring greatly, so that his will never be with the cold and lonely souls that know neither victory nor defeat. So I didn't get it exactly right.
Wow, that was
but it's a long quote.
Impressive.
But it's a long quote. But it's my favorite, because it really takes people to stand up, get in it, and do it, and try to make a difference.
Yep, to do hard things. Yeah, that's what you got to do.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again,
All right.
Sheriff.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Icons, featuring Sheriff Mike Chapman and hosted by Thomas Canavan, the museum's executive director. We hope you found this conversation enlightening and will join us again for another edition of Icons, where we introduce listeners to incredible people working within the law enforcement community who have made a profound impact in our world. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.